I am Vera Beyer. I am 30 years old, and last night I stood in the center of the timber frame home I built with my own hands, only to realize I was standing in an ambush. 75 of West Virginia's most influential energy tycoons and local politicians waited in a suffocating silence. My father Harlan handed me a manila folder containing DNA results and announced to the room, "The results prove you are not ours. We want our money back." Before the echo of his voice faded, my mother Loretta stepped forward and snatched my house and car keys straight off the kitchen island. My brother Wyatt just stood there, swirling his bourbon, watching my life unravel. I stood surrounded by people I once called family, and not a single one offered a word in my defense. But they did not know I had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. Before I continue, if this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Amanda Told Stories, but only if you genuinely want to know what happens next. Drop a comment telling me your age, where you are watching from, and what time it is there. Now let me take you back 48 hours to the moment the trap was set. The Appalachian wind howled against the solid oak beams of my living room. I am a forestry auditor. My days are spent hiking through dense mountain ridges, tracing property lines, and finding the rot hidden beneath healthy-looking bark. 6 months ago, I closed on this property, overlooking the rushing waters of the Monongahela River. I renovated it myself, choosing thick, ancient timber that could withstand any storm. I wanted a home rooted in reality, far away from the fragile facades my family preferred. But Harlan Beyer did not care about boundaries. 2 days before my 30th birthday, my kitchen felt less like a sanctuary and more like a staging ground. The air hung thick with the scent of roasting venison and caramelized onions. I wiped a streak of flour from my forehead, my back aching from 6 straight hours of prep work. I was funding and cooking for a 75-person gala I never wanted to host. Loretta walked through the front door without knocking. Her heels clicked a sharp, impatient rhythm across my reclaimed wood floors. She wore a tailored cashmere coat that cost more than my first car. She did not say hello. She ran a manicured finger along the edge of the granite island, inspecting the stone for a speck of dust she would not find. "Are you using the ceramic plates for the appetizers?" Vera asked. Her voice was soft, carrying that precise tone of disappointment she had perfected over 3 decades. "Yes," I replied, keeping my eyes on the cutting board. She sighed, a slow intake of air that filled the room. "Harlan invited the zoning board and 3 investors from Charleston. Ceramic feels so rustic. We agreed on a certain aesthetic. We need to project stability." We did not agree on anything. Harlan had called me a month prior, dictating that my house was the only suitable venue to show his investors that the Beyer family was rooted in Appalachian tradition. When I suggested hiring a catering company, he told me that true Southern hospitality required a personal touch, which translates to free labor. The front door swung open again, letting in a gust of frigid air. Harlan stepped inside, his chest puffed out under a bespoke wool suit. He carried a box of premium cigars, setting them on my dining table as if claiming territory. He surveyed the vaulted ceilings, nodding approvingly at the architecture I had paid for. "Place looks acceptable," Harlan stated. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor plan, visualizing where to corner his targets. "Make sure the bar is fully stocked by 5. I need the commissioner relaxed before we discuss the new land leases." Right behind him walked Wyatt, the golden child. Wyatt ran an energy contracting firm that specialized in cutting corners. He built subdivisions using cheap, imported veneer materials guaranteed to warp at the first sign of moisture. He strutted into my kitchen, wearing a smug grin and a designer watch that caught the overhead lighting. His wife, Natalie, trailed behind him, scrolling through her phone. "Smells like a pioneer camp in here," Wyatt joked, tossing his keys onto my pristine counter. He opened my refrigerator, rummaging past the prep trays of food to grab a craft beer he had not paid for. "You really went all out on the lumberjack vibe, sis." Natalie did not even look up from her screen. "Do you have any sparkling water?" she murmured. "The imported kind. My stomach cannot handle tap water." "It is filtered spring water, Natalie," I said, chopping a handful of fresh rosemary. She wrinkled her nose, finally glancing at my flour-dusted apron. "I will just wait for the bartender to arrive." I focused on the rhythmic sound of my knife hitting the wooden board. As an auditor, you learn to observe the details people try to hide. Wyatt projected wealth, but I noticed the subtle tension in his jaw. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the neck of his beer bottle. His phone vibrated constantly in his pocket, and each time it buzzed, a flicker of genuine panic crossed his eyes. He was drowning, and this party was their desperate attempt to secure a lifeline from the investors. I turned my back to them and walked over to the stove. A heavy cast-iron pot sat on the back burner, simmering a specific recipe I reserved for days when I needed to remember who I was. It was Appalachian sweet tea taught to me by a recluse named Silas Caldwell. Silas owned half the timber rights in the county, but lived like a ghost. When I was a teenager, surveying tree lines, he found me, crying on a ridge after a particularly brutal argument with Loretta. He handed me a thermos of this tea. It was not the standard sugary syrup. It required steeped black tea leaves, a heavy pour of dark amber honey sourced straight from the mountain, and a sharp pinch of black peppercorns. It burned the back of your throat just enough to wake you up. I stirred the dark liquid, the steam rising into my face, carrying the scent of wild honey and spice. The aroma cut through the smell of roasting meat and Loretta's expensive perfume. "What is that smell?" Loretta asked, waving a hand in front of her face. "It is overpowering." "It is just tea," I said quietly. Harlan checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting his silk tie. "Well, move it to the back porch to cool. We cannot have the house smelling like a spice market. The investors expect refinement. Wyatt, go over the talking points with your mother. I need everything flawless tonight." They moved into my living room, treating my home like a rented venue. They arranged the seating to their liking, moved my carefully placed centerpieces, and spoke loudly about profit margins and zoning permits. Not once did they ask how my day was. Not once did they say happy birthday. I poured a small amount of the dark tea into a mug and brought it to my lips. The heat radiated through my chest, grounding me. They thought I was just the quiet, obedient daughter, the workhorse who would stay in the kitchen and ensure their performance went off without a hitch. They believed my silence was submission. I looked at Harlan, who was now pointing sharply at a map of land parcels he had spread across my dining table. I looked at Wyatt, whose leg was bouncing anxiously as he checked his phone for the 5th time in 3 minutes. I looked at Loretta, who was rearranging my coasters because they did not align perfectly with the edge of the table. They came into my sanctuary, believing they held all the power. They were so confident in their own narrative, so blinded by their greed, that they never bothered to look closely at the person they had pushed into the shadows. They did not know that a forestry auditor spends her life examining the roots of things, digging through layers of dirt to find the truth. I took another sip of the tea, letting the black pepper bite the back of my throat. I set the mug down, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked back to the cutting board. The sun began to dip behind the Appalachian Ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. The first headlights swept across my gravel driveway. The politicians, the investors, the society families, they all began to pour through my front door, bringing the cold mountain air with them. I took my place in the kitchen, serving the food I paid for, watching my family perform their roles. The countdown had begun, and in just a few hours, Harlan would pick up his crystal glass, tap it with a silver spoon, and pull a manila envelope from his tailored coat. The grandfather clock in the hallway strikes 10. The deep chimes resonate through the oak beams of my living room, signaling the final hours of my 20s. Harlan picks up a silver spoon. He taps the metal against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing cuts through the low hum of conversation, slicing through the jazz music, playing softly from the hidden speakers. 75 guests turn their attention toward the kitchen island. Politicians halt their discussions on zoning laws. Energy executives lower their bourbon glasses. Socialites pause mid-laugh, turning their perfectly contoured faces toward the center of the room. Harlan stands tall, adjusting his posture to project a solemn, heavy authority. He surveys the crowd, making deliberate eye contact with a state senator, then nodding grimly to the regional director of the Commerce Commission. He is building a stage out of my kitchen. Thank you all for gathering here to celebrate Harlan Begins His Voice, carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned orator. But he lets his words trail off. He executes a calculated hesitation, allowing a heavy sigh to escape his lips. He reaches into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and slowly withdraws a thick manila envelope. He explains that our family recently underwent preventative genetic screening. He tells the crowd it was just a routine precaution for a hereditary heart condition prevalent in the Bayer lineage. The clinic expedited the results. They arrived yesterday morning. Harlan looks directly at me, his eyes brimming with a manufactured sorrow that could win awards. He raises the envelope for the room to see, then drops it onto the reclaimed oak surface of my kitchen island. The dull thud echoes in the silence. He speaks the next words clearly, enunciating every syllable to ensure they reach the furthest corners of the vaulted ceiling. The results prove you are not ours, Vera. We have been living a lie for 30 years. The silence that follows is total. It is the kind of quiet that swallows all the oxygen in a room, leaving nothing but a vacuum of shock. I can hear the crackle of the logs burning in the stone fireplace. I can hear the erratic ticking of the grandfather clock. Harlan does not stop there. He leans into his performance, painting a vivid picture of a grieving patriarch. He describes himself as a man betrayed by fate, tricked into pouring his love and resources into a stranger. He lays the blame on a hospital mix-up, a cosmic deception, weaving a narrative where he and Loretta are the ultimate martyrs. He speaks of the heartbreak of discovering his true bloodline, ends with Wyatt mourning the daughter he thought he had. The envelope sits inches from my hand. It looks entirely ordinary. Standard office supply stock, sealed with a metal clasp. But to the room it holds the destruction of my entire existence. It is the physical manifestation of my erasure from this family, from this social circle, from this life. Harlan waits for my reaction. He expects tears to stream down my face. He expects my knees to buckle, for me to shrink away, to apologize for breathing his air. He anticipates that I will collapse under the crushing weight of public rejection. That is how I was raised. I am supposed to be the obedient workhorse who absorbs the impact so the Bayer family name remains spotless. I let my shoulders drop. I widen my eyes, letting my breath hitch just enough in my throat to sell the performance. I grip the edge of the granite counter, pretending to steady myself against the shock. Let him believe he holds the upper hand. Let him think his ambush was a flawless victory. Because the truth is, I am not surprised in the slightest. 6 months ago, driven by a simple curiosity regarding my own heritage, I mailed a swab to a private genealogy registry. I bypassed the family doctor. I bypassed the local clinics. I already know I share 0 genetic markers with Harlan and Loretta Bayer. I already grieved that realization in private, sitting alone on my porch overlooking the river, coming to terms with the fact that the people who raised me were strangers in my blood. Harlan thinks he is dropping a bomb on my reality, but he is merely walking blindfolded into a snare I laid out and covered with leaves. My mind drifts away from the staring crowd, pulling me back to a freezing morning 3 months ago. I was standing in ankle-deep mud at a remote logging site in the southern coalfields. The air tasted of diesel exhaust and damp pine needles. My heavy work boots sank into the earth as I reviewed the timber yield reports for one of Wyatt's recent contracting projects. As a forestry auditor, my job is to match the physical reality of the land to the numbers printed on the page. I verify the roots. I count the rings. Wyatt claimed his crew harvested 300 acres of premium Appalachian hardwood. The invoices reflected top-tier pricing, signed and approved by investors. But standing on that ridge, the reality told a different story. The stumps left behind were sparse. The canopy was still largely intact. The math did not align with the geography. I retreated to the cab of my truck, cranking the heater to thaw my numbing fingers. I spent 4 hours tracing the discrepancies through a stack of operational ledgers. Wyatt was billing his investors for prime oak, but he was delivering cheap, low-grade pine imported from out of state. Worse, he was overstating his operational costs by millions of dollars. The money was vanishing into a maze of offshore shell corporations and phantom LLCs. My brother was not a successful entrepreneur. He was a fraud, running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme teetering on the edge of a catastrophic collapse. Harlan was co-signing the business loans, leveraging his own corporate assets to keep Wyatt afloat. Their entire empire was built on hollow foundations, ready to shatter into dust the moment an official inquiry began. That day in the truck, with muddy hands holding undeniable proof of federal fraud, I understood that my family was desperate. Desperate people do not act rationally, they panic. They look for a scapegoat. They look for liquid assets to seize and sell to cover their tracks. The memory fades, bringing the vaulted ceiling of my home back into sharp focus. Harlan's voice continues to boom across the living room, wrapping his financial desperation in the guise of emotional devastation. He is using these 75 guests as a weapon, a human barricade designed to corner me. He knows I hate making a scene. He knows I value my privacy and professional dignity above all else in this small town. He is gambling everything on the assumption that my fear of public shame will override my survival instincts. He wants me broken, isolated, and highly compliant. Loretta stands beside him, pressing a white silk handkerchief to the corner of her eye. She does not shed a single tear, but the delicate gesture is enough for the audience. Wyatt leans against the archway leading to the dining room, his arms crossed over his chest, nodding grimly as if he has just lost his beloved sister. Their performance is seamless. They have rehearsed this execution perfectly. The state senator, standing near the fireplace, shifts his weight, looking at me with a mixture of pity and severe discomfort. The energy tycoons exchange low whispers behind their hands, likely calculating how this sudden family scandal might affect their stock portfolios and joint ventures. I am the spectacle. I am the tragic figure provided for their evening entertainment. I focus my gaze on the manila envelope. I reach out and brush my fingertips against the rough paper. Harlan watches my hand, his eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. He thinks I am reaching for the documents to verify his claim, desperate for an explanation to make sense of my shattered world. I am just anchoring myself to the physical environment, calculating the precise timing of my countermaneuver. I let the silence stretch out. I let the discomfort steep in the room like bitter tea. The longer I remain quiet, the more Harlan's confidence swells. He takes a step closer to the island, leaning over the granite surface. His cologne, sharp and cloying, fills my lungs. He lowers his voice just enough so only the front row of guests can hear the next phase of his plan. He speaks to me with a tone usually reserved for a disobedient child caught stealing. He tells me that, because I am not a buyer by blood, everything they provided me was obtained under false pretenses. He lays the groundwork for the extortion he planned all along. He implies that my education, my upbringing, and the very house we are standing in are debts that must be settled immediately to avoid legal repercussions. The guests lean in, hungry for the resolution of this sudden drama. The tension vibrates in the air, a physical pressure pushing against my ribs. I keep my expression hollow, playing the part of the devastated daughter, waiting for them to overplay their hand. And just as Harlan prepares to demand the deed to my home, Loretta decides it is time to make her move. The heavy silence following Harlan's announcement hangs thick in the air. But it does not last. Before I can even part my lips to offer a fabricated gasp, Loretta slides past her husband. Her movements lack any trace of a grieving mother. She glides with the predatory grace of a hawk spotting exposed prey. She zeroes in on the granite island where I had foolishly left my belongings. My heavy brass house key and the worn leather fob for my truck rest beside the wooden cutting board. Loretta's manicured fingers dart forward, snatching the metal ring. The jagged metallic scrape of the keys dragging across the polished stone jolts the room. It is a harsh, violent sound that shatters the manufactured melancholy Harlan just constructed. Loretta turns to the assembly, clutching the key ring tightly against the breast of her expensive cashmere coat. She raises her chin, her eyes scanning the room to ensure every politician and executive is paying strict attention. Her voice rings out, clear and steady, devoid of any genuine sorrow. She announces that because I possess no buyer genetics, every single dollar in my upbringing constitutes a grand theft. She declares that my vehicles, my business assets, and the very real estate we are standing inside now serve as collateral. She calls it rightful compensation for 3 decades of deceit. I watch, my only means of transportation and the access to my own shelter, disappear deep into her tailored pocket. The icy calculation behind her action sends a chill racing down my spine. This is not a spontaneous emotional outburst. It is a highly tactical asset seizure, executed with military precision. She did not grab my wrists or raise her hand to strike me. She took my autonomy. She wants me stranded on this remote Appalachian ridge, cut off from the world, entirely dependent on their mercy. The murmurs among the influential onlookers shift. Sympathetic whispers curdle into uncomfortable muttering. Seizing a person's property crosses a distinct line, moving from private family tragedy into the realm of a bitter civil conflict. Harlan needs to maintain the moral high ground to keep these wealthy investors on his side. He needs a diversion to prevent the crowd from questioning the legality of Loretta pocketing my keys. He needs the guests to believe I am fundamentally untrustworthy, a parasite who deserves to be stripped of her belongings. Right on cue, a grating, familiar voice pierces the rising tension. A tall figure steps out from the shadows near the hallway archway. Derek. He smooths the lapels of his tailored navy suit as he strides confidently toward the kitchen island. 8 months ago, Derek returned my engagement ring. He stood in my driveway and stated he could not marry a woman who preferred inspecting soil samples and calculating timber yields over attending high society galas. He cited irreconcilable differences in ambition. Tonight, his ambition is on full display. Derek positions himself directly beside Harlan, forming a unified, masculine front. He addresses the bewildered onlookers, projecting a tone of righteous indignation. He introduces himself as my former fiancé, shaking his head as if burdened by a terrible secret. He claims he is yet another victim of my manipulative nature. Looking directly at the state senator seated near the fireplace, Derek weaves a fabricated tale about a verbal cohabitation agreement we supposedly forged before purchasing this property. He lies with terrifying, practiced ease. Derek tells the crowd that he personally financed the heavy oak timber renovations. He claims he poured his entire life savings into the foundation of this cabin, laying the riverstone for the fireplace himself. He tells them I evicted him the very moment the final nail was driven into the floorboards, keeping his investment and kicking him to the curb. He brands me a grifter, a calculating woman who extracts wealth from generous men and discards them when their bank accounts run dry. He formally announces to the room his intent to sue for full ownership of the property based on sweat equity and breached verbal contracts. His performance is a masterpiece of misdirection. It creates a chaotic, messy domestic dispute, muddying the waters perfectly. The assembly of elite guests eats the narrative right out of his palm. A broken engagement turning into a bitter property battle is a storyline they understand and gossip about at their country clubs. It distracts them from the bizarre cruelty of Harlan's genetic reveal. It paints me not as a victim of a family secret, but as a serial manipulator who exploits everyone around her. But Derek forgets that my entire career revolves around noticing discrepancies. As a forestry auditor, I do not merely look at the forest. I look for the diseased roots hidden beneath the soil. I tune out the venom spilling from his mouth. I focus instead on his body language. I observe the way he gestures to emphasize his false hardship. As he raises his left arm to point an accusatory finger at my chest, his suit cuff slides back. The overhead pendant lights catch the polished dial of a bulky mechanical timepiece strapped to his wrist. It features a distinct brushed steel casing and a midnight blue face. I recognize the exquisite craftsmanship instantly. It is a limited edition chronometer manufactured by an obscure subsidiary of Harlan's primary holding company. These watches are not sold in retail stores. They are gifted exclusively to executive board members, top-tier investors, and highly valued political allies. The market equivalent exceeds $20,000. Derek is a mid-level logistics manager. He regularly complained about the price of premium gasoline when we dated. He could never finance such a luxury item on his own salary. The gleaming timepiece serves as a beacon, illuminating the hidden architecture of this entire ambush. Derek is not a scorned lover seeking rightful justice. He is a mercenary. Harlan purchased his loyalty and his testimony to construct a labyrinth of legal confusion. The realization solidifies the ice pumping through my veins. This is a highly coordinated siege. Harlan and Loretta are not merely trying to embarrass me in front of their peers. They intend to render me financially hollow before the night ends. By claiming ownership of my keys and introducing a fraudulent cohabitation lawsuit through Derek, they are backing me into a corner. They want the looming threat of prolonged bankrupting litigation to force a swift surrender. I am facing an immediate physical threat of homelessness. My former family and my former partner stand united, forming an impenetrable wall between me and any potential exit. The 75 guests watch silently, judging, fully buying into the orchestrated illusion. They see a deceptive daughter and a ruthless ex-fiancé fighting over a remote cabin. They do not see the invisible strings Harlan is pulling from the shadows, manipulating every single person in this room. Loretta pats her cashmere coat pocket, the faint metallic jingle of my keys serving as a cruel, rhythmic taunt. Derek crosses his arms, ensuring the stolen watch gleams against the dark fabric of his suit. They have successfully stripped away my transportation, my security, and my reputation in less than 15 minutes. The emotional betrayal has rapidly hardened into a tactical nightmare. I am trapped in my own home, held hostage by the people I once trusted. Yet despite their overwhelming display of force, they have made a critical miscalculation. They assume I am unarmed. They think taking my keys leaves me defenseless, believing my strength relies on the assets they can physically confiscate. But my true power is not forged in brass or leather. It is stored in encrypted digital archives, verified audit trails, and the quiet, calculating patience of a woman who knows exactly how to read a fraudulent balance sheet. I stare at the expensive watch on Derek's wrist, letting the heavy silence stretch once more. I keep my face carefully blank, offering them no tears, no pleading, no satisfaction. If they want to play a game of creative accounting and legal extortion, I am more than ready to show them my ledger. But first, Harlan reaches into his jacket again, preparing to present his. The grandfather clock in the hallway strikes 10. The deep chimes resonate through the oak beams of my living room, signaling the final hours of my 20s. Harlan picks up a silver spoon. He taps the metal against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing cuts through the low hum of conversation, slicing through the jazz music playing softly from the hidden speakers. 75 guests turn their attention toward the kitchen island. Politicians halt their discussions on zoning laws. Energy executives lower their bourbon glasses. Socialites pause mid-laugh, turning their perfectly contoured faces toward the center of the room. Harlan stands tall, adjusting his posture to project a solemn, heavy authority. He surveys the crowd, making deliberate eye contact with a state senator, then nodding grimly to the regional director of the Commerce Commission. He is building a stage out of my kitchen. Thank you all for gathering here to celebrate Harlan Begins His Voice, carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned orator. But he lets his words trail off. He executes a calculated hesitation, allowing a heavy sigh to escape his lips. He reaches into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and slowly withdraws a thick manila envelope. He explains that our family recently underwent preventative genetic screening. He tells the crowd it was just a routine precaution for a hereditary heart condition prevalent in the Bayer lineage. The clinic expedited the results. They arrived yesterday morning. Harlan looks directly at me, his eyes brimming with a manufactured sorrow that could win awards. He raises the envelope for the room to see, then drops it onto the reclaimed oak surface of my kitchen island. The dull thud echoes in the silence. He speaks the next words, clearly, enunciating every syllable to ensure they reach the furthest corners of the vaulted ceiling. The results prove you are not ours, Vera. We have been living a lie for 30 years. The silence that follows is total. It is the kind of quiet that swallows all the oxygen in a room, leaving nothing but a vacuum of shock. I can hear the crackle of the logs burning in the stone fireplace. I can hear the erratic ticking of the grandfather clock. Harlan does not stop there. He leans into his performance, painting a vivid picture of a grieving patriarch. He describes himself as a man betrayed by fate, tricked into pouring his love and resources into a stranger. He lays the blame on a hospital mix-up, a cosmic deception weaving a narrative where he and Loretta are the ultimate martyrs. He speaks of the heartbreak of discovering his true bloodline, ends with Wyatt mourning the daughter he thought he had. The envelope sits inches from my hand. It looks entirely ordinary. Standard office supply stock, sealed with a metal clasp. But to the room, it holds the destruction of my entire existence. It is the physical manifestation of my erasure from this family, from this social circle, from this life. Harlan waits for my reaction. He expects tears to stream down my face. He expects my knees to buckle for me to shrink away to apologize for breathing his air. He anticipates that I will collapse under the crushing weight of public rejection. That is how I was raised. I am supposed to be the obedient workhorse who absorbs the impact so the Bayer family name remains spotless. I let my shoulders drop. I widen my eyes, letting my breath hitch just enough in my throat to sell the performance. I grip the edge of the granite counter, pretending to steady myself against the shock. Let him believe he holds the upper hand. Let him think his ambush was a flawless victory. Because the truth is, I am not surprised in the slightest. 6 months ago, driven by a simple curiosity regarding my own heritage, I mailed a swab to a private genealogy registry. I bypassed the family doctor. I bypassed the local clinics. I already know I share 0 genetic markers with Harlan and Loretta Bayer. I already grieved that realization in private, sitting alone on my porch overlooking the river, coming to terms with the fact that the people who raised me were strangers in my blood. Harlan thinks he is dropping a bomb on my reality, but he is merely walking blindfolded into a snare I laid out and covered with leaves. My mind drifts away from the staring crowd, pulling me back to a freezing morning 3 months ago. I was standing in ankle-deep mud at a remote logging site in the southern coal fields. The air tasted of diesel exhaust and damp pine needles. My heavy work boots sank into the earth as I reviewed the timber yield reports for one of Wyatt's recent contracting projects. As a forestry auditor, my job is to match the physical reality of the land to the numbers printed on the page. I verify the roots, I count the rings. Wyatt claimed his crew harvested 300 acres of premium Appalachian hardwood. The invoices reflected top-tier pricing, signed and approved by investors. But standing on that ridge, the reality told a different story. The stumps left behind were sparse. The canopy was still largely intact. The math did not align with the geography. I retreated to the cab of my truck, cranking the heater to thaw my numbing fingers. I spent 4 hours tracing the discrepancies through a stack of operational ledgers. Wyatt was billing his investors for prime oak, but he was delivering cheap, low-grade pine imported from out of state. Worse, he was overstating his operational costs by millions of dollars. The money was vanishing into a maze of offshore shell corporations and phantom LLCs. My brother was not a successful entrepreneur. He was a fraud, running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme teetering on the edge of a catastrophic collapse. Harlan was co-signing the business loans, leveraging his own corporate assets to keep Wyatt afloat. Their entire empire was built on hollow foundations, ready to shatter into dust the moment an official inquiry began. That day in the truck, with muddy hands holding undeniable proof of federal fraud, I understood that my family was desperate. Desperate people do not act rationally. They panic. They look for a scapegoat. They look for liquid assets to seize and sell to cover their tracks. The memory fades, bringing the vaulted ceiling of my home back into sharp focus. Harlan's voice continues to boom across the living room, wrapping his financial desperation in the guise of emotional devastation. He is using these 75 guests as a weapon, a human barricade designed to corner me. He knows I hate making a scene. He knows I value my privacy and professional dignity above all else in this small town. He is gambling everything on the assumption that my fear of public shame will override my survival instincts. He wants me broken, isolated, and highly compliant. Loretta stands beside him, pressing a white silk handkerchief to the corner of her eye. She does not shed a single tear, but the delicate gesture is enough for the audience. Wyatt leans against the archway leading to the dining room, his arms crossed over his chest, nodding grimly as if he has just lost his beloved sister. Their performance is seamless. They have rehearsed this execution perfectly. The state senator standing near the fireplace shifts his weight, looking at me with a mixture of pity and severe discomfort. The energy tycoons exchange low whispers behind their hands, likely calculating how this sudden family scandal might affect their stock portfolios and joint ventures. I am the spectacle. I am the tragic figure provided for their evening entertainment. I focus my gaze on the manila envelope. I reach out and brush my fingertips against the rough paper. Harlan watches my hand, his eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. He thinks I am reaching for the documents to verify his claim, desperate for an explanation to make sense of my shattered world. I am just anchoring myself to the physical environment, calculating the precise timing of my countermaneuver. I let the silence stretch out. I let the discomfort steep in the room like bitter tea. The longer I remain quiet, the more Harlan's confidence swells. He takes a step closer to the island, leaning over the granite surface. His cologne, sharp and cloying, fills my lungs. He lowers his voice just enough so only the front row of guests can hear the next phase of his plan. He speaks to me with a tone usually reserved for a disobedient child caught stealing. He tells me that because I am not a buyer by blood, everything they provided me was obtained under false pretenses. He lays the groundwork for the extortion he planned all along. He implies that my education, my upbringing, and the very house we are standing in are debts that must be settled immediately to avoid legal repercussions. The guests lean in, hungry for the resolution of this sudden drama. The tension vibrates in the air, a physical pressure pushing against my ribs. I keep my expression hollow, playing the part of the devastated daughter, waiting for them to overplay their hand. And just as Harlan prepares to demand the deed to my home, Loretta decides it is time to make her move. Before Harlan can issue his final ultimatum, Wyatt steps forward. The sharp click of his imported leather shoes against my reclaimed oak floor draws every eye in the room. He moves with a practiced swagger, raising a hand to gently touch his father's shoulder. It is a calculated display of filial solidarity. Harlan yields the floor, stepping back to let his golden child take the spotlight. Wyatt turns to face the crowd, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He hangs his head for a brief moment, letting a heavy sigh escape his lips. When he looks up, his face is a mask of weary devastation. He begins to speak, his voice carrying the smooth, persuasive cadence of a salesman closing a high-stakes deal. He tells the 75 guests that finding out the truth about my genetics shattered his worldview. He claims he always felt a distance between us, a fundamental lack of shared values, but he blamed himself. Now he says everything makes sense. He points a finger at me, his expression hardening into righteous anger. He tells the investors and politicians that raising a stranger drained the Bayer family resources. He spins a tale of sacrificed inheritances and diverted trust funds, claiming my education and this very house were financed by money that rightfully belonged to the Bayer bloodline. Near the stone fireplace, Natalie watches her husband perform. She leans against the mantel, her designer gown shimmering in the firelight. A distinct smirk plays on her lips. She leans over to the wife of a commerce commissioner, whispering behind a manicured hand, her eyes darting toward me with naked contempt. Natalie is a woman who measures a person's worth by their zip code and the clarity of their diamonds. To her, I am just a squatter who has finally been issued an eviction notice. Watching Wyatt command the room, the final puzzle piece locks into place within my mind. This entire theatrical production is not just about Harlan's greed or Loretta's cruelty. It is a desperate rescue mission. Harlan's doctored ledger demands $400,000. That is the exact figure Wyatt needs to cover the impending margin calls on his failing energy contracts. They are not trying to disown me for the sake of family honor. They are trying to liquidate my assets to save the golden child from federal indictment and total bankruptcy. The hypocrisy is almost suffocating. Wyatt stands there preaching about family loyalty and stolen resources, while his entire existence is a monument to shortcuts and deceit. My memory shifts to a relentless downpour 2 years ago. Wyatt called me in a panic at 2 a.m. I drove my truck out to a new residential subdivision his firm was supposedly developing. I found him pacing in the mud, shivering in a thin designer jacket. He had squandered the initial investor capital on luxury cars and expensive vacations, leaving the construction site paralyzed. I walked the framework of those half-built houses with a flashlight. He used cheap imported pine wrapped in vinyl to mimic the appearance of structural timber. The beams were already bowing under the weight of the rain. The foundation was cracked. He begged me to co-sign a bridge loan leveraging my steady income as a forestry auditor to secure the cash he needed to hide his incompetence. I refused. I told him the structure was compromised, and the truth would eventually surface. He threw a tantrum in the mud, screaming that I did not understand the vision, that I lacked the ambition to build an empire. He builds illusions constructed from flimsy veneer. I inspect reality. I rely on solid oak. Back in the present, Wyatt paces the length of the kitchen island. He puffs up his chest, projecting an aura of immense success to the room full of elite guests. He turns his attention directly to the energy tycoons, flashing a brilliant, hollow smile. He assures them that the buyer firm is stronger than ever. He brags about a recent string of record-breaking quarterly profits. He claims his current contracting projects are expanding across the state line, securing unprecedented capital. He frames the seizure of my property not as a financial necessity, but as a matter of strict moral principle. He tells the crowd he does not need my money, but he refuses to let a parasite profit from his family's hard work. He struts across the room, basking in the approving nods of the investors who believe every word he says. He looks untouchable, a wealthy heir protecting his dynasty. But the audience in this room does not know the secret I carry. They do not know what I did at 3 o'clock this afternoon. While Loretta was micromanaging the caterers and Harlan was arranging his cigars, I sat in my home office with my laptop open. As a licensed auditor, I have direct access to the state regulatory compliance portal. After verifying the discrepancies in Wyatt's offshore accounts, I compiled a comprehensive discrepancy report. I attached the forged invoices, the inflated yield projections, and the hidden ledger transfers. I verified my credentials, reviewed the submission protocol, and clicked send. The system operates on an automated algorithmic trigger. When a certified auditor flags a commercial account for severe federal anomalies, the regulatory board initiates an immediate mandatory asset freeze pending a formal investigation. Wyatt is standing in my kitchen boasting about his overflowing bank accounts and his booming empire demanding my house to make things right. But his corporate accounts are locked. His personal lines of credit are suspended. The luxury SUV parked in my driveway is currently tied to a frozen asset sheet. He is a walking ghost, a man bragging about a fortune that evaporated into thin air hours ago. I watch him pull his phone from his pocket, checking the screen out of sheer habit. His brow furrows for a fraction of a second. The device is silent. He expects constant updates, balance alerts, and transaction confirmations. He thinks it is just bad cellular reception in the mountains. He has no idea his financial life support has been unplugged. The sheer irony of the moment dances on the edge of a smile I refuse to let show. He is using his fabricated wealth as leverage to justify stealing my home, entirely unaware that he is currently the poorest man in the room. Wyatt turns back to me, the smug confidence radiating from every pore. He plants his hands on the kitchen counter, leaning in close. His breath smells of expensive bourbon and stale cigars. He lowers his voice, but keeps it loud enough for the state senator to overhear. "It is over, Vera." He speaks with an arrogant finality. "You played a good game, but the ride is finished. Sign the deed over to the firm, walk out the front door, and we might just forget to press charges for the money you drained from this family." He gestures broadly to the vaulted timber ceilings and the expansive glass windows overlooking the dark river. "This house belongs to the buyer empire," he declares. "You never deserved any of it." I meet his gaze without flinching. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticks steadily, marking the passing seconds. The trap is set, the bait has been taken, and my golden brother has just firmly locked the cage door from the inside. I remain perfectly still, letting the silence stretch again, waiting for Harlan to deliver the final, fatal ultimatum. The brass pendulum swings behind glass. Tick. It slices through the heavy atmosphere. 11:15. 45 minutes remain until the calendar turns, marking my 30th year. The antique timepiece stands near the foyer, a towering mahogany structure I restored by hand. Tonight it acts as an executioner's metronome. 75 spectators form a jagged horseshoe around my kitchen island. No one speaks above a hushed murmur. I hear the clinking of ice melting in unattended bourbon glasses. I smell expensive floral perfumes turning sour with nervous sweat. The elite residents of our Appalachian Valley are witnessing a public disembowelment, and they cannot look away. A local circuit judge shifts his weight, dropping his gaze to the reclaimed oak floorboards. He owes Harlan favors. He will not intervene. Next to him, a coal executive's wife leans forward, her eyes wide with ravenous curiosity. She is memorizing every detail to fuel tomorrow's country club gossip. They are all complicit. My home has transformed into a coliseum. My family engineered this staging to ensure I have no allies, no escape routes, and no breathing room. Wyatt holds his position on my left, projecting arrogant certainty. Derek anchors the right side, adjusting his suit cuffs, playing the role of the wronged lover. Loretta blocks the main archway, her hand still resting on the pocket concealing my keys. They form a literal barricade. My past and my present unite in a coordinated effort to obliterate my future. I am an island in my own sanctuary, besieged by the very people who were supposed to offer harbor. Harlan steps forward. The soles of his leather Oxfords thud against the hardwood, a deliberate predatory march. He abandons the theatrical grief he wore earlier. The mask slips, revealing the cold, calculating strategist underneath. He closes the distance until he breaches my personal space. He stands 6 feet and 2 inches tall, a broad-shouldered patriarch, accustomed to bending the world to his will. His shadow falls over me, blocking out the warm glow of the pendant lights overhead. He invades my airspace. I can feel the heat radiating from his chest. The scent of his aftershave, sharp cedar and clove, claws at the back of my throat. I refuse to step back. If I retreat even a single inch, he wins the psychological territory. I plant my boots firmly into the floor I built. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird seeking an exit, but I force my breathing to remain shallow and even. From the inside pocket of his jacket, Harlan extracts a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. It is an ostentatious instrument, the kind used to sign lucrative mergers and destructive treaties. He moves with sudden, sharp force. He grabs my right wrist. His grip is iron-tight, bruising, leaving no room for negotiation. He pries my fingers open and thrusts the cold metal barrel into my palm. He closes my hand around it, trapping the pen in my grip. He reaches over the granite counter and slides the doctored financial ledger toward me. The paper glows bright white under the kitchen lights. A dotted line sits at the bottom of the final page, waiting for my signature. Beside it lies a quitclaim deed, freshly printed naming Wyatt's Holding Company as the new proprietor of my riverfront property. The terms are clear. I sign away my sanctuary, my forestry business assets, and my independence, or they unleash a legal nightmare that will bury me in debt for the rest of my life. Harlan does not address the crowd this time. He leans down, bringing his face perilously close to my ear. His voice drops into a dark, guttural register intended only for my ears. It is a tone he used during my childhood whenever I dared to ask too many questions or requested anything beyond my designated needs. It is the voice of absolute control. You have never been anything but a burden, Vera. He hisses, his breath hot against my cheek. A costly, ungrateful parasite. We clothed you, we fed you, we allowed you to pretend you belonged among us. You owe us this debt. Sign the paper. Do it now, or I swear I will strip you down to nothing. You will leave these mountains with the clothes on your back and a fraud indictment attached to your name. The words are designed to strike the deepest fault lines of my psyche. For 3 decades, I operated under the crushing belief that love was conditional, tied directly to my usefulness. I audited forests, repaired homes, bailed out my brother, and swallowed my pride, all to earn a sliver of validation from the man threatening to destroy me. He is pulling on those old deep roots. He expects the well-worn programming to activate. He anticipates that the sheer terror of disappointing him, combined with the paralyzing fear of public scandal, will force my hand to move across the dotted line. My knuckles turn white around the gold barrel of the pen. The nib hovers a mere 2 inches above the fraudulent deed. The room holds its collective breath. The ticking of the grandfather clock seems to amplify each second, hammering against my eardrums. Tick, tick. The pressure is immense. It feels like standing at the bottom of the Monongahela River, the current rushing over my head, threatening to drag me under into the dark, freezing depths. The gold metal of the pen warms against my skin, slick with the sweat of my own palm. I trace the embossed letters of Harlan's corporate logo on the side of the barrel. This instrument built his empire, and now he intends to use it to sign my execution order. I stare at the crisp black ink printed on the quitclaim deed. The legal jargon is dense, but the ultimate meaning is brutal. Transfer of all rights, titles, and interests. Surrender. Defeat. If I press the nib to the paper, the ink will flow. The signature will legally bind me to his fabricated narrative. I will lose the timber frame walls I sanded by hand. I will lose the forestry auditing firm I built from the ground up, client by client, analyzing soil samples and canopy densities. I will lose the very essence of my autonomy, and worse, I will confirm his cruelest accusation. I will validate his claim that I am nothing without his charity. The silence is so profound I can hear the blood rushing through my own veins. The onlookers are statues, frozen in anticipation. The state senator wipes his brow. Natalie adjusts her diamond necklace. Wyatt smirks, already mentally spending the equity of my land. They are a pack of wolves circling a wounded deer, waiting for the final collapse. Harlan's shadow remains cast over me. His presence is a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, attempting to force me into a seated position at the island. The psychological warfare is reaching a crescendo. The heat, the smell of his cologne, the ticking clock, the staring eyes, the heavy pen, the stark white paper, it is a masterclass in coercion. He thinks the pressure has broken me. He sees my still hand and mistakes my calculation for paralysis. He assumes my silence is the quiet whimper of a defeated animal. The grandfather clock strikes the half hour. 11:30. 30 minutes left. Harlan taps a thick finger against the dotted line. The sound is a sharp command. "Do it," he murmurs. "End this embarrassment, Vera." The gold-plated pen rests heavily against the skin of my palm, slick with a fine layer of sweat. Harlan waits, his breathing shallow, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow across the crisp, white pages of the quitclaim deed. He expects my compliance. He relies on 3 decades of programmed obedience, betting his entire financial future on my inability to cause a scene. He thinks the weight of 75 staring guests will crush my spine. He is wrong. A profound clarity washes over me, cold and sharp as the mountain air outside my windows. The terrified, dutiful daughter recedes into the recesses of my mind, replaced entirely by the professional forestry auditor. I spend my life identifying structural weaknesses. I walk through thousands of acres of dense timber searching for the hidden rot that threatens to bring down the canopy. I analyze data, verify ledgers, and dismantle fraudulent claims. I look at the man hovering over me, and I no longer see a father. I see a hostile site requiring immediate excavation. I loosen my grip on the pen. I do not throw it. I do not snap it. I simply let it slip from my fingers. The heavy metal cylinder drops onto the granite countertop with a distinct, sharp click. The sound cuts through the suffocating tension like a gunshot. Harlan blinks, a micro-expression of pure confusion flashing across his features. His jaw tightens. He opens his mouth to issue another threat, but I step out from under his shadow before he can form the words. I turn my back to him, deliberately dismissing his authority. I walk slowly toward the stove, my boots striking the reclaimed oak floor in a steady, unhurried rhythm. The crowd watches in stunned fascination. Loretta narrows her eyes, her hand tightening around the pocket holding my stolen keys. Wyatt shifts his weight, the smug grin faltering just a fraction. They built a cage of social pressure, and I am casually strolling through the bars. I reach the heavy cast iron pot simmering on the back burner, the Appalachian sweet tea. I pick up a ceramic mug and use a silver ladle to pour the dark, steaming liquid. The aroma of steeped black leaves, wild ridge honey, and sharp black pepper fills the space around me. This recipe belongs to the mountains. It belongs to Silas Caldwell. It represents authenticity, a stark contrast to the cheap theatrics playing out in my living room. I lift the mug to my lips and take a long, deliberate sip. The pepper burns the back of my throat, a fiery reminder that I am alive, awake, and entirely in control of my own territory. The heat radiates through my chest, anchoring me to the present moment. I lower the mug. I turn around to face the assembly, leaning casually against the edge of the stove. I meet Harlan's gaze. I do not blink. I am not signing anything I state. My voice does not shake. It is even modulated and carries effortlessly across the silent room. A ripple of genuine shock passes through the spectators. The state senator raises an eyebrow. The energy executives exchange bewildered glances. They came to witness a swift execution, but the condemned prisoner just refused the blindfold. Harlan's face flushes a deep, mottled red. The veins in his neck pulse against the stiff collar of his dress shirt. "You do not have a choice, Vera," he snarls, abandoning his grieving patriarch persona. The mask is slipping rapidly. "You owe this family for every breath you take. You will sign that paper, or I will ensure you spend the next 10 years drowning in litigation." I set my mug down on the counter. I walk back to the kitchen island, bypassing the gold pen entirely. Instead, I pick up the doctored financial ledger he presented to the crowd moments ago. The paper is thick, printed with the official letterhead of his primary holding company. I flip open the cover. "If you are going to present fraudulent documents in front of the regional commerce director," I say, projecting my voice toward the front row of guests, "you should really hire a competent accountant." The regional director stiffens his eyes, darting between Harlan and the ledger in my hands. The word fraudulent acts as a spark in a room full of dry kindling. Harlan steps forward, reaching for the folder. "Give that back. You do not understand what you are reading." I step out of his reach, holding the pages up to the light. "Let us look at page 3, I announce, ignoring his outstretched hand. "You claim a total expenditure of $400,000 allocated for my upbringing and education over a 30-year period. However, you applied a compounding interest rate modeled on commercial capital gains rather than a standard trust depreciation schedule." I flip to the next page, scanning the columns of numbers I had already analyzed from afar. Furthermore, on line 42, you list tuition payments for my university degree. Yet the dates correspond with a period when you actively claimed me as a dependent tax deduction under a separate corporate entity. You cannot categorize a personal tax shelter as a recoupable business expense on a retroactive civil claim. The mathematics are not just illegal, they are embarrassing. The energy tycoons in the room are financial predators. They understand the mechanics of wealth taxation and liability better than anyone. Hearing me dismantle the ledger with precise forensic terminology shifts the atmosphere entirely. They are no longer looking at me with pity. They are looking at Harlan with intense scrutiny. In their world, incompetence is a far greater sin than cruelty. Harlan's hands drop to his sides. His mouth opens, but no sound emerges. He is out of his depth, drowning in his own fabricated numbers. And then there is the matter of the valuation. I continue, turning to the final page containing the quitclaim deed. You demand I sign this property over to a shell company named VB Holdings. You listed the assessed value of this riverfront acreage at a fraction of its market worth. I assume you did this to avoid triggering a capital gains audit during the transfer. But you failed to account for the mineral rights attached to the eastern ridge, which appreciate the value by at least $2 million. I drop the ledger onto the granite counter. It lands with a soft slap, a pathetic stack of lies exposed to the harsh light of reality. You brought 75 influential people into my home tonight to watch you extort me, I say, my tone dropping to a quiet, lethal register. You expected me to cower because you told them we do not share the same blood? But biology does not excuse terrible math, Harlan. You are trying to steal my home because you are desperate, and you are doing a remarkably sloppy job of it. The silence returns, but its texture has changed. It is no longer heavy with my impending doom. It is thick with Harlan's profound humiliation. The elite guests are evaluating him, analyzing his amateur mistakes, wondering if his corporate contracts are riddled with similar structural flaws. The whispers begin again, fast and sharp, aimed directly at the patriarch who thought he controlled the narrative. Loretta realizes the tide is turning. She steps forward, her grip on my keys forgotten, trying to salvage the wreckage. Vera, you are upset, she says, her voice trembling with forced maternal concern. You are lashing out because the truth hurts. We only want what is fair. Fairness has a paper trail, Loretta, I reply, locking eyes with her. And your paper trail leads directly to federal prison. Wyatt finally drops his arms, his smirk vanishing into the ether. He takes a step toward me, his fists clenching at his sides. He realizes that the diversion failed. The crowd is no longer paying attention to Derek's fake cohabitation story. They are fixated on the glaring financial crimes I just laid out in plain English. Wyatt opens his mouth, ready to unleash a barrage of verbal abuse to regain control of the room. But I am not finished. I have dismantled their theatrical extortion, stalling their momentum, and proving I refuse to be a pawn. Now it is time to reveal the evidence that will ensure none of them ever recover from this night. I reach beneath the kitchen counter, sliding open a hidden drawer I prepared 48 hours ago. My fingers trace the cool metal handle of the hidden drawer, built seamlessly into the underside of the kitchen island. I slide it open. The track glides silently on oiled bearings. Inside rests a thick, genuine leather binder bound with heavy steel rings. It contains 300 pages of forensic accounting, categorized by bright color-coded tabs. I lift it with both hands and let it drop onto the granite surface directly next to Harlan's pathetic, flimsy envelope. The heavy thud echoes through the room, a physical manifestation of actual gravity. I look past Harlan, past Loretta and Wyatt, aiming my gaze directly at the men and women wearing tailored suits and holding crystal glasses. You came here tonight expecting to celebrate a milestone and network with the Bayer family. I say, ensuring my voice reaches the far timbered walls of the cabin. Instead, you were forced to watch a rather unconvincing theatrical performance. Harlan wants you to believe I am a financial drain on this dynasty. He wants you to think I owe him. But since we are airing out ledgers tonight, I think it is only fair we review the real numbers. I flip open the heavy binder, turning to the first section, marked with a bright crimson tab. For those of you who only know me as the quiet daughter, allow me to clarify my profession. I am a licensed forestry auditor. I do not sit in a boardroom. I hike into the deep Appalachian ridges. I measure the circumference of harvested timber, test soil degradation, and reconcile the physical yield with the invoices submitted to the state. And for the past 7 months, I have been auditing Bayer Energy and Contracting. Wyatt takes a sudden, sharp breath. The smug arrogance drains from his face, replaced by a chalky, sickly pallor. He glances toward the front door, measuring the distance, calculating an escape route. His designer shoes squeak slightly as he shifts his weight backward. Let us discuss the Blackwood Ridge development. I continue tapping my index finger against a spreadsheet filled with highlighted columns. Wyatt secured $5 million in investor capital to selectively log and develop premium residential lots. Several of you standing in this room wrote those checks. The state senator stiffens. A prominent real estate developer lowers his drink, his eyes narrowing into fine slits. Wyatt reported that the project encountered unforeseen bedrock issues requiring additional capital. He submitted invoices for specialized drilling equipment and expert geological surveys, but I hiked up to Blackwood Ridge 3 weeks ago. There is no drilling equipment. There is no bedrock issue. He clear-cut 50 acres of protected old-growth timber, sold the raw wood off the books to an unlicensed mill across the state line, and funneled your investment capital into a series of offshore shell companies. Harlan steps forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Shut your mouth, Vera. You are speaking slander. Slander requires the statements to be false. Harlan, I reply, turning to the next tab. I have the mill receipts. I have the geolocated photographs of the barren ridge. I have the corresponding bank transfers hidden under layers of dummy corporations. But Wyatt is just the symptom. You are the disease. I shift my attention back to the patriarch. The room feels incredibly small now, the air thick with impending ruin. Wyatt could never secure that level of funding on his own merit. You co-signed those loans, Harlan. You leveraged the primary assets of your holding company to provide a foundation of legitimacy for his scheme. You acted as the fiduciary guarantor, which means when his house of cards collapses, the federal regulators will not just seize his assets, they will dismantle yours. The atmosphere in the room transforms. The quiet, uncomfortable tension morphs into a palpable, vibrating panic. These guests are not just spectators anymore. They are victims. They are realizing that the lavish lifestyle displayed before them was financed by their own stolen capital. The whispers escalate into sharp, urgent questions. The regional commerce director pulls out his cell phone, his face flushed with anger, his thumb hovering over the dial pad. I reach back into the hidden drawer and pull out my digital tablet. The screen illuminates, casting a pale blue glow across the polished granite counter. I tap the glass twice, bringing up the state regulatory compliance portal. You see, when an auditor uncovers irrefutable evidence of federal fraud, we do not just file a report and wait for a court date. We initiate emergency protocols. I swipe my finger across the tablet, casting the display directly to the large smart television mounted above the stone fireplace. The soft jazz music cuts out, replaced by a stark, high-resolution image of a banking dashboard. The screen displays the primary operating accounts for Wyatt's contracting firm and Harlan's holding company. Big, bold red letters flash across the top of the display. Status frozen. Pending federal investigation. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, I announce. My voice cutting through the rising clamor, I submitted my comprehensive audit to the State Regulatory Board. The algorithm triggered an immediate mandatory asset freeze. Your accounts are locked, Wyatt. Your credit lines are suspended, Harlan. The luxury vehicles parked in my driveway, the tailored suits you are wearing, the very cigars sitting on my dining table, none of it belongs to you anymore. It belongs to the federal government. The room erupts. The polite veneer of high society shatters into a million jagged pieces. The real estate developer shouts a string of profanities surging forward before a colleague grips his shoulder to hold him back. The state senator paces near the foyer, barking frantic orders into his phone, demanding an immediate conference with his legal counsel. The carefully curated networking event has devolved into a chaotic crime scene. The investors realize their capital is gone, vanished into thin air, and the men responsible are standing right in front of them, trapped in my kitchen. Loretta grips the edge of the counter, her knees buckling beneath her. The white silk handkerchief falls from her grasp, fluttering onto the floor like a flag of surrender. Her cashmere coat suddenly looks like a cheap costume. She stares at the red letters on the television screen, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. Wyatt backs away, his eyes darting wildly around the room. He resembles a cornered animal looking for a gap in the fence. He bumps into the archway, his hands trembling as he reaches for his own phone, desperately swiping at the screen, praying the television display is a glitch. The glowing screen of his device only confirms his nightmare. 0 available credit. I look at Harlan. The dignified, grieving father is dead. In his place stands a ruined, desperate criminal. The veins in his forehead throb visibly. His breath comes in ragged, uneven gasps. He realizes he has lost everything. His wealth, his reputation, his legacy, all dismantled by the daughter he deemed worthless. He cannot buy his way out of a frozen account. He cannot charm a federal indictment. His entire empire has burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes. The realization breaks his sanity. The calculated strategist vanishes, replaced by pure, primal rage. His eyes darken, stripping away any remaining trace of humanity. He lets out a guttural roar, a sound that echoes off the timber beams. He lunges across the kitchen island, his large hands reaching directly from my throat. He intends to silence me the only way he has left. He wants to crush my windpipe to stop the flow of words that destroyed his life. I brace myself, my muscles locking, ready for the physical impact of his desperation. But before his fingers can graze my skin, a voice thunders from the shadows near the back hallway, shaking the very foundation of the cabin. The distance between us vanishes in a heartbeat. Harlan's polished Oxfords slip slightly on the reclaimed hardwood floor, a testament to his blind, reckless fury. I lock my knees and tighten my core, preparing to absorb the brunt of a desperate man fighting for his erased legacy. A state senator shouts something incomprehensible. A crystal champagne flute shatters against the stone hearth, the sharp sound cutting through the chaos. Harlan extends his arms, his fingers curling into rigid claws aimed directly at my throat. He wants to crush the vocal cords that just dismantled his entire universe. Before his manicured nails can even graze the collar of my shirt, a voice erupts from the shadows of the rear hallway. It is a sound that does not belong at a high society networking gala. It possesses the raw, vibrating density of a rock slide tearing down a mountain ridge. "Stop right there!" The command is not shouted. It does not carry the shrill panic of a guest trying to prevent a physical altercation. It resonates with unquestionable, chilling authority, freezing the air inside the cabin. Harlan halts. The sheer momentum of his forward lunge betrays him, forcing him to grab the edge of the granite island to prevent himself from sprawling onto the floorboards. His chest heaves fiercely. He slowly turns his head toward the source of the interruption. I watch the remaining drops of color drain from his flushed cheeks. His jaw goes slack. The primal rage evaporates, instantly replaced by a terrifying, suffocating realization of exactly who is standing in my home. Stepping out of the dimly lit corridor is a man who was never placed on Loretta's meticulously curated guest list. Silas Caldwell. While the energy tycoons and politicians wear tailored Italian wool and silk ties, Silas wears a heavy canvas work jacket over a simple flannel shirt. His boots are worn leather, scuffed from decades of walking the steepest ridges of the Appalachian chain. His face is a map of deep, weathered lines, framing eyes as hard and gray as river stones. He is a phantom in this valley, a legendary recluse who owns more timber acreage than the state government. More importantly, he is the apex predator of this local financial ecosystem. He is the primary creditor holding the immense mountain of debt that Harlan just defaulted on. The murmuring guests fall into a stunned, breathless silence. The regional commerce director instinctively takes a big step backward, bumping into a potted fern. The real estate developers lower their gazes, avoiding direct eye contact with the man who dictates the logging yields for the entire eastern seaboard. The crowd parts automatically, clearing a wide path across the living room, as if yielding to royalty. They recognize that true, unfiltered power has just entered the room, rendering their own wealth insignificant. While the investors fear Silas for his economic might, Loretta experiences a vastly different kind of terror. I shift my gaze to my mother. Her reaction is not rooted in the frozen bank accounts currently displayed on the television screen. It is a visceral, bone-deep horror. Her hands tremble so fiercely that she drops her expensive leather clutch. It hits the floor, spilling bright red lipstick and platinum credit cards across the oak planks. She clutches her throat, her mouth opening in a silent, desperate gasp. Loretta recognizes Silas. Her terror indicates she knows he is not here to collect a monetary debt. She knows he represents a ghost she tried to bury 3 decades ago. The polished, unbothered facade she maintained for 30 years crumbles into dust. She looks like a woman standing on the gallows, watching the executioner pull the lever. Wyatt presses his back flat against the dining room archway, making himself as small as possible. The golden child recognizes the man who holds the ultimate leash on the corporate loans he squandered. But Silas does not even glance at my brother. He ignores the shivering contractor entirely. Silas walks with a slow, deliberate cadence. Every heavy footfall echoes in the silent house. He passes the state senator. He passes the trembling real estate developers. He approaches the kitchen island. Harlan attempts to straighten his posture, trying to salvage a shred of dignity from the wreckage of his pride. He opens his mouth, perhaps to offer a frantic apology or a desperate plea for a loan extension. Silas does not acknowledge Harlan. He acts as if the patriarch of the Bayer family is nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture blocking his path. The blatant dismissal is a lethal blow to a narcissist's fragile ego. Harlan shrinks his broad shoulders, collapsing under the weight of his own profound irrelevance. Silas stops directly across the granite counter from me. He is close enough that I can smell the distinct scent of fresh pine needles, cold rain, and aged leather radiating from his canvas jacket. His gray eyes study my face, tracing the angles of my jaw, the shape of my brow, the exact shade of my eyes. The intensity of his stare is overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. It lacks the critical judging edge I grew accustomed to under Harlan and Loretta. He looks at me as if searching for something he lost a very long time ago. He lowers his gaze to the countertop. He spots the ceramic mug resting next to my heavy leather audit binder. A faint wisp of steam still curls from the dark liquid inside. He reaches out a calloused, scarred hand. His thick fingers wrap around the delicate handle of the mug. He lifts it closer to his face, closing his eyes as he inhales the specific aroma of steeped black tea, wild mountain honey, and sharp black peppercorns. A profound sorrow mixes with the steely resolve in his expression when he opens his eyes. He sets the mug down gently, treating the ceramic vessel with reverence. He looks back at me, his voice softening to a low, melodic murmur that carries a lifetime of quiet grief. That is Caroline's recipe. The words hang in the air, a final puzzle piece snapping firmly into place. The financial devastation I just orchestrated fades into the background, suddenly overshadowed by the biological mystery standing right in my kitchen. The power dynamic shifts entirely. This is no longer just a boardroom execution or a simple audit reveal. It is a deeply personal excavation of blood and hidden history. The silence stretches once more, heavy with anticipation. The remaining guests hold their breath, sensing that the true climax of the evening has yet to arrive. The revelation of the frozen bank accounts crippled the Bayer family, but the arrival of the timber baron promises to bury them forever. I stand tall, meeting the steady gaze of the recluse who taught me how to brew tea on a mountain ridge 15 years ago, waiting to learn exactly who Caroline is and why her name drains the remaining life from Loretta's eyes. The name Caroline acts as a key turning in a rusted lock. My breath catches. The scent of black pepper and wild honey rising from the ceramic mug suddenly feels like a coded message left behind decades ago. I look at Silas Caldwell. His weathered features soften for a fraction of a second, revealing a profound, enduring grief before the hardened timber baron returns. He turns his attention away from me and slowly faces the assembly of stunned onlookers. 75 politicians, energy executives, and socialites hold their collective breath. Silas points a thick, calloused finger at the manila envelope resting on the granite island. The very same folder Harlan used to orchestrate my public execution just 30 minutes prior. Harlan Bayer presented a genetic test to this room, Silas says. His voice does not require shouting to reach the vaulted ceiling. It resonates with a deep, natural acoustics, commanding the space entirely. He stood here and told you all that he was a victim. He claimed he endured a cruel deception, raising a child that did not share his blood. Silas takes a single step toward Harlan. The disgraced patriarch shrinks backward, pressing his spine against the edge of the stainless steel refrigerator. The laboratory results are authentic. Silas continues sweeping his gaze across the crowd. Vera does not possess a single drop of Bayer genetics. But every other word that left this man's mouth was a calculated, desperate lie. They did not suffer a hospital mix-up. They were not tragic victims of fate. Silas reaches into the deep interior pocket of his heavy canvas work jacket. He withdraws a folded stack of papers. Unlike Harlan's crisp, pristine office stock, these documents are aged. The edges are yellowed, fragile with time, bearing the faded blue ink of official county seals from 30 years ago. He places them on the kitchen island, right beside the fake ledger and the useless gold pen. These are the original untampered birth records, Silas announces. He taps the brittle paper, pulled directly from the state archives before Harlan could pay a local clerk to shred them. I stare at the yellowed paper. My chest tightens, a sudden fierce pressure building behind my ribs. 30 years ago, Silas says, his tone dropping into a solemn register, my younger sister Caroline Caldwell lost her life on the Eastern Ridge. She was inspecting a new logging tract when a poorly secured timber crane failed. The accident was devastating. It shattered our family. He looks at me, his gray eyes shining with an unspoken bond. I remember the stories whispered in the remote logging camps, tales of a fierce, brilliant woman who knew the Appalachian soil better than any surveyor. A woman who brewed spiced tea to keep her crew warm during freezing morning audits. The traits I thought isolated me from the Bayers were not flaws. They were my inheritance. Caroline left behind a 3-month-old infant, Silas tells the room. In the chaos of her sudden death, the county stepped in to establish temporary wardship. Harlan and Loretta were not wealthy energy tycoons back then. They were mid-level municipal accountants, drowning in their own early debts. Loretta lets out a faint, strangled gasp. She covers her face with her trembling hands, her cashmere coat slipping off one shoulder. She looks fragile, hollow, stripped of her curated perfection. They saw an opportunity. Silas spits the words, his disgust palpable. They manipulated the county guardianship records. They used their municipal access to forge adoption papers sealing the original files and erasing the Caldwell name from the registry. They did not take a child out of the goodness of their hearts. They executed a long-term theft. The crowd recoils. The state senator steps away from Harlan as if the man carries a contagious disease. White-collar financial fraud is one thing, a crime these executives might secretly tolerate or understand. But stealing a grieving family's infant to exploit a tragedy crosses a line of fundamental human decency. The disgust radiating from the guests is a physical force. Silas turns back to the room, his posture rigid. You are looking at Vera. But her birth certificate reads differently. She is Vera Caldwell, the only biological daughter of Caroline Caldwell, which makes her the sole direct heir to the largest undivided timber fortune in the state of West Virginia. The revelation hits the room with the force of a tectonic shift. The whispers erupt frantic and bewildered. The real estate developers stare at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The math clicks in their heads. The Caldwell estate encompasses hundreds of thousands of acres, controlling the mineral rights, the logging yields, and the pristine riverfronts that drive the local economy. I am not a discarded orphan begging for scraps. I am standing on my own soil, holding an unmatched legacy. I look down at my hands. The calluses on my palms, the dirt permanently etched under my fingernails from inspecting roots and bark. I always felt like an outsider in Harlan's sterile, superficial world. Now I understand why. I, or product of the mountains, born from a lineage that respects the earth rather than merely exploiting it. I process the magnitude of the timber fortune. The Caldwell estate is not just money, it is a profound responsibility to the Appalachian ecosystem. It means controlling the watersheds, the replanting initiatives, and the sustainable logging practices I dedicated my life to studying. Harlan and Wyatt view forests as mere numbers on a spreadsheet, resources to be stripped, sold, and abandoned. My mother, Caroline, viewed the land as a living, breathing entity. The realization that I am meant to protect her legacy fills me with a fierce, burning resolve. I am no longer fighting just for my own cabin. I am fighting for the entire ridge. Harlan shakes his head, a pathetic, erratic motion. You cannot prove intent, he stammers, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. We provided a home. We gave her a life. We protected her. You protected an investment, Silas counters, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. You kept her close, feeding her just enough approval to ensure her unquestioning loyalty. You turned her into the family workhorse, making her audit your books and repair your properties, all while keeping her blind to her true worth. I watched the man who raised me unravel. Harlan's tailored suit seems to hang loosely on a frame that has suddenly shrunk. He grips the edge of the refrigerator, his knuckles white, his eyes darting frantically for a sympathetic face in the crowd. He finds none. The politicians he bribed, the investors he courted, the socialites who drank his champagne, they all look at him with undisguised revulsion. Wyatt slides further down the wall near the dining room. The golden child realizes he is nothing more than a parasite. He spent his entire life strutting around, bragging about an empire built on stolen capital and a stolen sister. His designer watch, his imported shoes, his luxury vehicle parked outside, they are all monuments to a profound, systemic lie. Loretta sinks onto a wooden stool, her perfect posture destroyed. She stares at the yellowed birth record sitting on the island, the physical proof of her monstrous decision. She sacrificed her morality for financial stability, trading a child's true identity for a comfortable life in the country club circuit. The elite guests begin to reposition themselves physically within the room. They inch away from the buyer family and subtly angle their bodies toward Silas and me. It is a primal display of allegiance, shifting in real time. The energy tycoons who previously mocked my flour-dusted apron now look at me with overt respect, recognizing that I hold the ultimate veto power over their future land leases. The socialites who sneered at my rustic ceramic plates now study my features, searching for the Caldwell resemblance. The emotional whiplash of the evening is staggering. Just an hour ago, I braced myself for public humiliation, preparing to defend my modest forestry business and my timber frame cabin against a hostile takeover. Now I stand recognized as the heir to an empire that dwarfs anything Harlan ever dreamed of building. The shift in reality is disorienting, yet it feels incredibly correct. The missing pieces of my internal puzzle finally lock together. Silas reaches out and touches my shoulder. His hand is heavy, warm, and real. It is the first time in my 30 years I have felt a genuine, unconditional familial connection. He does not view me as an asset or a burden. He looks at me and sees his sister. He sees his blood. "We searched for you," Silas says, directing his words solely to me, ignoring the 75 spectators. When the county records showed Caroline's child transferred out of state, I spent a decade chasing phantom paper trails. Harlan paid off the right clerks to ensure the trail went cold. I only uncovered the forgery 2 weeks ago, when your routine regulatory inquiries triggered a flag in a dormant land registry. My own meticulous auditing habits brought my uncle right to my front door. I exposed Harlan's financial rot, and, in doing so, I accidentally illuminated my own path home. The pieces fit together flawlessly. But a lingering question remains, hovering in the tense air of the cabin. Why tonight? Why did Harlan orchestrate this dramatic, highly risky public execution on the very eve of my 30th birthday? He could have confronted me in private. He could have forged the quitclaim deed under different pretenses. Instead, he chose maximum exposure and a strict ticking deadline. Harlan notices the physical shift in the room. He sees his carefully constructed social network abandoning him instantly. The panic in his eyes deepens, transforming into sheer terror. He looks at the grandfather clock, watching the minute hand inch closer to the top of the hour. His grand extortionist deadline is collapsing. Silas turns away from me, his eyes narrowing as he fixes his gaze on the antique timepiece in the hallway. The brass pendulum swings steadily. 11:40. 20 minutes until midnight. You did not stage this circus tonight out of mere cruelty, Harlan. Silas says, his voice echoing with a dark, impending certainty. You knew the clock was running out. You knew what happens the moment she turns 30. Silas's voice cuts through the stunned silence, resonant and sharp. You knew exactly what you were doing, Harlan. You built an entire theatrical production tonight, not out of grief, but out of sheer, unadulterated desperation. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimes again. It is 11:45. 15 minutes remain until midnight. 15 minutes until the calendar officially turns to my 30th birthday. The deep rhythmic chiming suddenly feels less like a marker of time and more like a warning siren. The assembly of guests watches in rapt attention. The state senator, the energy tycoons, the socialites, they are all leaning forward, hungry for the final revelation that will bury the Bayer dynasty forever. Silas gestures toward the heavy yellowed birth records sitting on the granite island next to my audit binder. When Caroline passed, he explains, his tone carrying the weight of decades of unresolved grief. She left behind a massive, undivided land trust. It encompasses the entirety of the Eastern Ridge, including the mineral rights and the untouched riverfronts. He pauses, allowing the sheer magnitude of the estate to settle over the room. The real estate developers exchange wide-eyed glances, rapidly calculating the astronomical value of such a pristine, sprawling Appalachian tract. Because Caroline died unexpectedly, without a formalized will, Silas continues the state mandated that the trust be held in escrow until her sole biological heir reached the age of maturity. But the courts did not set that age at 18 or 21. They set it at 30. The number hangs in the air, a glowing neon sign illuminating the dark, convoluted motives of the evening. Harlan used his municipal connections to forge the adoption papers and steal guardianship, Silas says, his voice hardening with disgust. But he could never legally access the principal of Caroline's trust. The state locked it down tightly. He could only skim the marginal interest generated by the holding accounts. That interest is what funded the early days of Bayer Energy. That stolen capital is what built the foundation of his fragile empire. Loretta whimpers softly from her wooden stool, burying her face deeper into her hands. Wyatt presses himself flat against the archway, his face drained of all color, finally understanding that his entire privileged existence was financed by a slow, methodical theft. But skimming interest was never enough for Harlan. Silas states, pointing an accusatory finger at the ruined patriarch. He built a house of cards. He over-leveraged his holding company to finance Wyatt's incompetent contracting schemes. They drained their own resources, piled up insurmountable debts, and finally reached the edge of total collapse. Silas turns his piercing gray eyes directly toward me. And they knew that tonight, at exactly midnight, the state courts would automatically initiate the legal transfer of Caroline's trust to you, Vera. The moment the clock strikes 12, you become the outright owner of a $12 million Appalachian estate. The figure hits the room with physical force. $12 million. It is a staggering sum, vast enough to swallow Harlan's debt 10 times over. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. Harlan knew the courts would notify you of your inheritance tomorrow morning, Silas explains, addressing the guests once more. He knew you would finally discover your true bloodline, and worse, you would discover the millions of dollars in interest he siphoned over the decades. He faced complete financial ruin and a guaranteed federal indictment. The timber baron looks back at Harlan, his expression etched with absolute contempt. So you devised a frantic, time-sensitive heist disguised as a family dispute. You gathered these influential people here tonight to create an overwhelming wall of social pressure. You ambushed her with a fake DNA narrative, banking on her lifelong conditioning to make her surrender without a fight. Silas gestures to the fraudulent quitclaim deed sitting on the counter. You cornered her. You threatened her with massive litigation. You demanded she sign over all her assets, including her businesses and this very property, to a shell company you control. You needed her signature before midnight. The grandfather clock ticks steadily each second, underscoring the chilling reality of Harlan's extortion. If Vera had signed that deed tonight, Silas says, his voice echoing in the silent cabin, she would have unknowingly signed away her right to Caroline's trust, just minutes before it legally transferred to her name. You intended to intercept her $12 million inheritance, use it to pay off your massive debts, and leave her stranded, penniless, and believing she was a discarded orphan? The sheer scale of the financial crime leaves the room breathless. The guests are no longer just witnessing a family scandal. They are looking at a calculated, multi-million-dollar fraud executed with monstrous cruelty. The disgust radiating from the crowd is thick and palpable. The regional commerce director shakes his head slowly, viewing Harlan not as a peer, but as a predator who just got caught in his own trap. I stare at Harlan, the man, who demanded I call him father for 30 years. He stands slouched against the refrigerator, his bespoke suit wrinkled, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looks pathetic, stripped of his authority, a small man who tried to swallow a mountain and choked. You stole my mother's identity, I say, my voice steady, cutting through the silence. You stole my childhood. You funded your empire with my legacy. And tonight, you tried to steal my future. Harlan does not meet my gaze. He stares at the reclaimed oak floorboards, his hands trembling at his sides. He has no defense. The doctored ledger, the fake DNA story, the staged ambush, every lie has been exposed, dragged into the harsh light of reality by the very daughter he severely underestimated. I look at Wyatt, the golden child who spent his life bragging about a fortune that never belonged to him. I look at Loretta, the woman who snatched my keys, ready to throw me out into the cold mountain night to secure her own comfort. They are all complicit. They all willingly participated in this grotesque execution driven by greed and a fundamental lack of morality. The grandfather clock chimes the quarter hour. 11:50. 10 minutes until midnight. The deadline that Harlan designed to break me has transformed into the exact moment of my liberation. I am not a helpless victim waiting for a savior. I am an auditor who uncovered the rot, and I am the rightful heir to an Appalachian empire. The tension in the room shifts again, moving from shock to a deep, satisfying anticipation of the inevitable consequences. The guests are watching closely, waiting to see how the final minutes of this incredible standoff will unfold. Harlan and his family are trapped in my home, surrounded by the evidence of their crimes, with nowhere left to run. But Loretta is not ready to surrender. She realizes the magnitude of the impending collapse. She understands that when the clock strikes 12, she loses everything. Her country club memberships, her tailored cashmere coats, her carefully curated social standing, it will all vanish, replaced by handcuffs and a federal courtroom. Desperation is a dangerous, unpredictable force. Loretta lifts her head from her hands. Her eyes are wide manic, filled with a sudden, frantic resolve. She spots the yellowed birth records sitting on the granite island, the only physical proof of Silas's claims, the only documents tying me to Caroline Caldwell and the $12 million trust. She pushes herself off the wooden stool, her movements erratic and sudden. She ignores the stares of the 75 guests. She ignores Silas's imposing presence. She lunges across the kitchen, her manicured hands reaching desperately for the fragile, aged papers, determined to destroy the truth before the clock can strike midnight. Loretta's movement is sudden, stripping away the final layer of her cultured country club facade. The woman who spent the evening complaining about rustic ceramic plates and missing sparkling water transforms into something feral. She pushes off the wooden stool, her expensive cashmere coat catching on the edge of the granite counter, nearly pulling her down. She ignores it. She ignores the horrified stares of the local politicians and energy tycoons. Her singular frantic focus is the stack of yellowed brittle paper resting beside the fake ledger. The original birth records. The physical proof connecting me to Caroline Caldwell and the $12 million land trust. Loretta believes that if she can tear those papers to shreds, if she can destroy the visible evidence in front of these 75 witnesses, she can somehow rewind the clock. It is a desperate, illogical gambit, born of pure terror. She lunges across the kitchen island, her manicured fingers extending like talons, aiming directly for the fragile documents. She is fast fueled by adrenaline and the sheer panic of impending ruin. But I am closer, and I have spent my entire life anticipating the exact moment the Buyer family would turn violent. I do not shout. I do not flinch. I step smoothly into her path, placing my body between her grasping hands and the birth records. I reach out and catch her right wrist in midair. My grip is not born of anger. It is born of years hauling heavy timber gear up steep mountain ridges. It is an iron, unyielding hold. Loretta's forward momentum crashes against my solid stance. The sudden halt sends a shockwave up her arm, snapping her head back. She gasps, a sharp, ragged sound, her eyes wide with shock. For 30 years, she relied on my obedience. She expected me to shrink to apologize, to yield to her authority. Feeling the undeniable physical strength in my grip shatters that illusion entirely. Let me go! she snarls, her voice dropping its refined pitch, replaced by a harsh, grating hiss. She twists her wrist, digging her manicured nails into the back of my hand. I do not release her. I tighten my hold just enough to stop her struggling. You are not destroying anything else tonight, Loretta. The guests watch the physical confrontation with breathless intensity. The state senator takes another step backward. The regional commerce director watches with clinical detachment, observing the complete collapse of a woman who once dictated local high society. Loretta realizes she cannot overpower me. Her physical strength is nothing compared to the desperation clawing at her sanity. She shifts her tactics, retreating to the only weapon she believes she still possesses. She uses her free hand to reach into the pocket of her cashmere coat. She pulls out the heavy brass house key and the worn leather fob from my truck. The very items she snatched from this counter less than an hour ago, intending to strip me of my independence. She holds the keyring up, jingling the metal in the air between us. The sharp, metallic clinking echoes through the silent cabin, a frantic, chaotic sound. You think you won, Vera, Loretta spits her chest, heaving, her flawless makeup smeared by sweat. You think a piece of yellowed paper changes anything? We raised you. We provided for you, and I still hold the keys to this property. She sneers, a grotesque contortion of her features, believing she still holds a trump card. You are standing in our house. We funded the down payment, we managed the renovations, you are nothing but an ungrateful tenant, and I want you out. Pack your bags and leave. Her voice rises in pitch, echoing off the vaulted timber ceilings. She is trying to project authority, attempting to remind the remaining guests that she still controls the physical assets. She thinks possessing the brass key equals ownership. I stare at the keys dangling from her trembling hand. I look at the woman who stole my mother's identity, who treated me like a disposable workhorse, and who just attempted to destroy the final proof of my existence. A slow, cold satisfaction settles over me, settling deep into my bones. The trap I prepared 48 hours ago did not just involve freezing Wyatt's accounts or exposing Harlan's ledger. It required securing my own foundation. I finally release her wrist. Loretta stumbles backward, rubbing her arm, her eyes flashing with a fleeting delusional triumph. You can keep the key, Loretta, I say, my voice steady, projecting clearly across the room. It will make an excellent souvenir of the night you lost everything. Her sneer falters, her brow furrows in confusion. What are you talking about? As an auditor, I explain, my tone shifting into a clinical professional register. I understand the importance of establishing a clear, indisputable chain of title, especially when dealing with individuals known for financial fraud. I turn my gaze toward the energy tycoons and real estate developers watching the exchange. I knew Harlan intended to claim this property tonight. He practically telegraphed his extortion plot when he insisted on hosting this gala here. He thought the original deed bearing my name would be easy to contest in court if he claimed he provided the initial capital. I look back at Loretta. She is clutching the keys tightly against her chest, her knuckles white, her breathing erratic. So, at 8 o'clock yesterday morning, I continue, I paid a visit to the county clerk's office. I initiated a formal, irrevocable transfer of assets. I signed the deed to this riverfront property, the timber frame cabin, and the surrounding acreage directly over to the Caldwell Land Trust. The silence in the room returns, heavier and more profound than before. The implications of the transfer ripple through the crowd. Loretta stares at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. Wyatt, still plastered against the archway, lets out a low, defeated groan. Harlan covers his face with his hands, recognizing the fatal, unfixable checkmate. I did not just protect my home, I state clearly. I placed it under the impenetrable legal umbrella of a $12 million estate. I turned to Silas Caldwell, who was standing near the hallway, watching the exchange with arms crossed over his canvas jacket. The gray-eyed timber baron offers a single sharp nod of approval. Which means, I say, turning my attention back to the ruined woman standing in my kitchen, you are currently holding a piece of brass that opens a door you no longer have any legal right to enter. Loretta's eyes dart wildly around the room, searching for a lifeline, an ally, anyone who will validate her fabricated ownership. The guests avert their gazes. They recognize the severity of the situation. By standing in this kitchen, demanding I leave, and refusing to vacate the premises yourself, I say, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper, you are no longer evicting a tenant, Loretta. You are legally trespassing on a billionaire's property. The poetic justice strikes the room with tangible force. The woman who tried to render me homeless and financially destitute is now standing on stolen ground holding a useless key, facing immediate arrest for trespassing on an estate she tried to plunder. The sheer satisfaction radiating from the moment is immense. It is not born of cruelty, but of a balanced, undeniable reality. The socialite who built her life on theft is finally confronted by an immovable boundary. Loretta looks down at the keys in her hand. Her fingers loosen. The heavy brass ring slips from her grasp, falling onto the reclaimed oak floor with a dull, final thud. The silence stretches thick with the scent of impending consequences. The trap has been sprung, the assets are secured, and the extortionists are fully exposed. But the night is far from over. The golden child Wyatt realizes the walls are rapidly closing in, and desperation pushes him to make one final disastrous move. The heavy brass keys hitting the reclaimed oak floorboards sound like a death knell for the Byer dynasty. Loretta stares at the metal ring resting near the toe of her designer shoe, her chest heaving with erratic, shallow breaths. The realization that she is standing as a trespasser on a billionaire's estate finally pierces her shock, freezing her in place. Harlan remains crumpled near the refrigerator, a broken patriarch drowning in the wreckage of his extortion plot. But it is Wyatt, the golden child, who reacts next. For 30 years, Wyatt coasted through life wrapped in a protective layer of unearned privilege. He was the heir apparent, the handsome contractor who strutted through country clubs and elite galas, spending fortunes he never generated. He built his entire identity on the illusion of endless wealth and untouchable status. But tonight, that protective layer has been systematically stripped away, exposing the frightened, incompetent fraud hiding underneath. He stands pinned against the archway leading to the dining room. His eyes dart frantically around the cabin, sweeping over the frozen faces of the 75 guests. He sees the state senator whispering urgently to an aide. He watches the regional commerce director pull out a cell phone, likely dialing emergency contacts to sever all ties with Byer Energy. The elite social network that Wyatt relied upon to validate his existence is actively dismantling itself right in front of him. He looks at his wife, Natalie. Natalie is a woman engineered for high society. She married Wyatt for the security of the Bayer name and the boundless limits of a corporate credit card. She endures his arrogance and his fragile ego because the financial compensation is robust. But tonight, she has just learned that her husband is not a wealthy entrepreneur. He is a bankrupt felon who squandered stolen investor capital on cheap veneer and offshore shell companies. Natalie does not scream. She does not throw a tantrum or demand explanations. She operates with the cold, ruthless calculation of someone preserving their own survival. She understands that standing next to Wyatt is now a liability she cannot afford. I watch her step away from the stone fireplace. She moves with deliberate grace, her silk designer gown rustling softly against the hardwood. She ignores the stares of the real estate developers and the energy executives. She walks directly to the center of the kitchen, stopping just a few feet away from the granite island where the fake ledger, the useless gold pen, and the authentic birth records sit. She raises her left hand. The diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band catch the light from the overhead pendants, sending sharp, brilliant fractures of light across the room. Wyatt bought that ring using the first major influx of stolen capital from the Blackwood Ridge project. It is a 3-carat monument to federal fraud. Natalie slides the rings off her finger in one smooth, fluid motion. She places them gently onto the granite surface. They make a soft, distinct clinking sound, a sharp contrast to the heavy thud of Loretta's dropped keys. She does not look at Wyatt. She does not offer a word of comfort, a goodbye, or a final insult. She simply turns on her heel and walks toward the front door. The crowd parts for her automatically. She pulls her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders, pushes open the heavy oak door, and steps out into the frigid West Virginia night. The door closes behind her with a definitive click. Wyatt watches her leave, his mouth opening in a silent protest. He reaches a hand out toward the hallway but drops it just as quickly. The final pillar of his fabricated life has just walked out, leaving him entirely exposed. The silence inside the cabin shifts from stunned disbelief to a tense, electric anticipation. The guests are holding their breath, waiting for the final inevitable collapse. Wyatt looks at the frozen bank accounts still glowing on the large smart television above the fireplace. He looks at Silas Caldwell, the towering timber baron standing near the hallway, blocking any potential escape through the main entrance. He looks at Harlan, who refuses to meet his son's gaze. Finally, Wyatt looks at me. His eyes are wide, glassy with sheer terror. He is not a man prepared to face accountability. He is a coward, accustomed to having someone else clean up his messes. He realizes that the frozen accounts and the detailed audit I submitted to the state regulatory board mean a federal indictment is not just a possibility. It is an imminent certainty. He makes a split-second decision, driven entirely by panic. He turns away from the crowd and bolts. He abandons his parents. He abandons his pride, and he sprints toward the rear of the cabin. His designer leather shoes squeak frantically against the hardwood floor. He intends to slip out the heavy glass sliding doors that lead to the expansive wraparound deck overlooking the river. From there, he hopes to reach his luxury SUV parked near the edge of the gravel driveway, intending to flee the state before the authorities can piece together the extent of his crimes. He reaches the glass doors, grabbing the handle with trembling, sweaty hands. He yanks the door open, letting a blast of freezing mountain wind tear through the living room. He stumbles out onto the deck, the wood groaning slightly under his frantic weight. I do not chase him. I do not shout for someone to stop him. I simply stand by the kitchen island, folding my arms across my chest, watching him run. Wyatt clears the deck and hits the gravel driveway. He sprints toward his black SUV, his breath pluming in the cold air. He reaches into his jacket pocket, pulling out his electronic key fob. He presses the unlock button repeatedly, his hands shaking so violently he nearly drops the device. The vehicle chirps the headlights flashing, confirming his escape route is ready. He grabs the heavy door handle, throwing it open, preparing to launch himself into the driver's seat and vanish into the Appalachian darkness. But as the interior lights of his SUV illuminate, they highlight something else, resting just beyond the edge of my property line. Red and blue strobe lights erupt from the darkness. The sudden blinding flashes cut through the pitch-black mountain night, reflecting off the towering pines and the rushing surface of the Monongahela River. 4 local police cruisers turn onto the long gravel road leading up to my cabin. They move quickly, without sirens, indicating a coordinated, targeted approach. The heavy tires crunch loudly against the gravel as they fan out, forming an impenetrable barricade across the entrance to the property. Wyatt freezes, one foot resting on the running board of his luxury vehicle. He stares at the flashing lights, his face illuminated by the alternating crimson and azure strobes. The panic in his eyes deepens into total, paralyzing despair. The authorities are not here by accident. They did not happen to patrol this remote ridge on a Friday night. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, when I submitted the comprehensive financial audit detailing millions of dollars in federal fraud and illegal logging operations, I did not just trigger an automated asset freeze. I filed a sworn affidavit with the State Attorney General's office. I provided them with geolocated evidence, forged invoices, and the offshore shell company routing numbers. I gave them everything they needed to secure immediate emergency arrest warrants for Harlan Beyer and Wyatt Beyer, citing a severe flight risk. The cruisers come to a halt, boxing Wyatt in completely. There is no route to the main highway. There is no escape path through the dense, unforgiving timberline. The Golden Child is cornered. Car doors open in unison. Uniformed officers step out into the freezing air, their movements crisp and authoritative. Two officers immediately advance toward the black SUV, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Wyatt slowly lowers his foot from the running board. He drops the electronic key fob onto the gravel, raising his hands in a gesture of absolute defeat. The arrogance, the smug entitlement, the practiced swagger, it all evaporates into the thin mountain air. He is just a frightened, broken man, facing the devastating reality of his own actions. Inside the cabin, the 75 guests press themselves against the large glass windows, watching the scene unfold on the driveway. The murmurs rise into an excited, chaotic chatter. They are witnessing the literal destruction of the Beyer dynasty in real time, a spectacle far grander than any society gala could offer. Harlan pushes himself away from the refrigerator, stumbling slightly as he moves toward the glass doors. He watches his only son, his golden heir, being patted down and handcuffed against the hood of a luxury vehicle financed by stolen funds. The sight shatters the final remnants of his sanity. He lets out a low, agonizing groan, a sound born of profound failure and irreversible loss. Loretta remains frozen near the kitchen island, staring blankly at the dropped brass keys on the floor. She realizes that the flashing red and blue lights are not just for Wyatt. They are coming for Harlan, and inevitably, they are coming for her. The forgery, the stolen guardianship, the decades of financial manipulation, it is all unraveling with terrifying speed. The officers finish securing Wyatt, marching him toward the back of a waiting squad car. The Golden Child's head hangs low, unable to meet the gazes of the elite guests, watching his humiliation through the windows. The lead detective, a stocky man wearing a heavy winter jacket over his suit, leaves the driveway and strides purposefully up the wooden steps of the deck. He walks through the open glass sliding doors, stepping into the warmth of the cabin. He scans the room, his eyes sweeping over the silent, staring crowd. He spots Harlan, standing near the glass, a broken shell of a patriarch. "Harlan Beyer," the detective says, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The final conflict has arrived, bringing the physical consequences directly into the heart of my sanctuary. The extortionists are cornered. The evidence is secured. But Harlan has one final desperate move left to play. The lead detective steps fully into the warmth of my living room, his heavy boots tracking a fine layer of Appalachian frost across the reclaimed oak floorboards. Two uniformed officers flank him, their hands resting cautiously on their leather utility belts. The flashing red and blue strobes from the driveway cast long, rotating shadows across the vaulted timber ceilings, painting the 75 elite guests in alternating washes of crimson and sapphire. The soft jazz music has long since stopped, leaving the expansive space saturated with a suffocating, clinical silence. The detective pulls a folded document from his thick winter jacket. It is a federal warrant stamped and authorized by the state attorney general. He begins to read the charges aloud, his voice devoid of any sympathy, treating the patriarch of the Bayer dynasty like a common street criminal caught in a clumsy lie. Fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny, forgery. Each word strikes the stagnant air like a steel hammer driving a nail into a coffin. The legal terminology dismantles the illusion of their high society prestige, drawing bare the grotesque machinery of their crimes. Harlan stands frozen near the sliding glass doors. The imposing, tailored titan who demanded my subjugation just an hour ago is gone, replaced by a frail, trembling impostor. He shrinks his broad shoulders, hunching forward, his chest caving inward, as if the oxygen has been siphoned directly from his lungs. The state senator, the energy tycoons, and the real estate developers watch him with unblinking critical eyes. This is the exact public execution Harlan designed for me. He invited these specific individuals to witness my destruction, intending to use their influential presence as a weapon to force my compliance. He wanted them to watch me sign away my home and my dignity under duress. Now that exact same audience serves as the silent jury for his profound, irreversible downfall. The mirror is flawless. The poetic retribution is undeniable. He cannot hide behind his wealth because the wealth is frozen. He cannot hide behind his reputation because the reputation is shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He is laid bare, exposed as a thief who stole a grieving family's child to fund a fragile, fraudulent empire. One of the uniformed officers steps forward, grasping Harlan by the wrist. The patriarch offers no resistance. The metallic click of the steel handcuffs ratcheting closed around his wrists echoes sharply through the quiet cabin. The sound finalizes the end of his reign. Across the kitchen, the second officer approaches Loretta. She remains rooted near the granite island, her gaze fixed on the dropped brass keys resting near the toe of her designer shoe. When the officer asks her to turn around and place her hands behind her back, she complies with a hollow, robotic stiffness. The woman who meticulously curated every aspect of her social existence, who judged the quality of ceramic plates and the aesthetic of a timber cabin, is reduced to a handcuffed suspect. The officer secures her wrists. Her expensive cashmere coat slips bunching awkwardly around her shoulders, ruining her pristine silhouette. Loretta looks toward the society wives she tried to impress all evening. She searches their faces for a shred of pity, a hint of solidarity. She finds none. The wealthy women avert their eyes, taking small, deliberate steps backward, eager to distance themselves from the toxic contagion of her scandal. Loretta closes her eyes, a single tear cutting a wet track through her flawless makeup. It is not a tear of remorse for stealing Caroline's infant daughter. It is a tear mourning the permanent loss of her country club memberships, her dinner party invitations, and her fabricated prestige. The officers guide Harlan and Loretta toward the front door, maneuvering them past the grand stone fireplace and the stunned onlookers. As Harlan approaches the center of the room, he suddenly stops digging the soles of his polished shoes into the hardwood to resist the forward momentum. The officer gives him a firm tug, but Harlan plants his feet, twisting his torso to look back at me. The arrogant, calculating strategist is replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. His eyes are wide, swimming in a frantic, desperate sweat. The veins in his neck bulge against his stiff collar. He realizes that I am the only person in this room who holds any sway over his immediate future. I submitted the forensic audit. I filed the sworn affidavit. He thinks he can still pull a hidden string, still activate a remnant of the obedience he programmed into my childhood. He opens his mouth, his voice cracking, shedding every remaining ounce of dignity he ever possessed. Vera. He pleads, his tone a pathetic, high-pitched whine that makes the nearby investors grimace in disgust. Please, you have to tell them this is a mistake. Tell the detective it is just a family misunderstanding. We can fix the ledgers. We can sort out the trust fund together. We can make it right. Just tell them to take these cuffs off. Please, Vera, you owe me that much." The 75 guests hold their collective breath. The tension spikes, electrifying the air. They watch the exchange, waiting to see if the dutiful daughter will surface. If the decades of psychological conditioning will force me to rescue the man who abused and exploited me. Silas Caldwell stands in the background, a silent, imposing sentinel in his canvas jacket, watching the interaction with steel-gray eyes. He does not intervene. He allows me to handle my own closure, trusting the strength I inherited from the mountains. I look at Harlan. I search my heart for a flicker of anger, a trace of sorrow, or a lingering shadow of fear. I find nothing. I feel a profound, sweeping emptiness where my anxiety used to live. The iron grip he held over my psyche is gone, evaporated into the cold Appalachian night. He is just a small, greedy man wearing handcuffs in my living room. I step out from behind the granite island, closing the distance until I am mere inches away from him. I look directly into his panicked, pleading eyes. The scent of his expensive cologne mixes with the stale sweat of his terror. I keep my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders squared. I lower the pitch of my voice until it carries the frigid, uncompromising chill of a mountain frost, ensuring every syllable lands with lethal precision. I am not family, remember I state, letting the words hang in the heavy space between us. I want you off my property. Harlan recoils, as if struck by a physical blow. His jaw drops, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. The last sliver of delusional hope extinguishes from his gaze, leaving behind a hollow, defeated void. The ultimate payoff lands perfectly, echoing his own cruel words back at him, sealing his fate with his own twisted logic. He sags against the grasp of the uniformed officers, all resistance draining from his limbs. He becomes dead weight, a broken shell accepting his ruin. The lead detective nods a tight professional gesture, signaling the end of the encounter. The officers march Harlan and Loretta out the front door, guiding them down the stone path toward the waiting squad cars lined up on the gravel driveway. Wyatt is already seated in the back of a cruiser, his head bowed, his golden future erased. The heavy oak door swings shut, sealing the freezing winter night outside. The flashing red and blue strobes fade as the vehicles pull away, leaving the timber frame cabin bathed in the warm, steady glow of the pendant lights. Inside, the 75 influential guests remain frozen in a stunned, reverent silence. They do not whisper. They do not reach for their phones. They simply stare at the empty space where the Bayer dynasty just collapsed. The suffocating tension is gone, replaced by the quiet, peaceful dawn of a reclaimed life. The battle is over, the fortress is secure, and the truth has finally taken root in the soil. 6 months have passed since the flashing crimson and azure strobes painted the timber beams of my living room. The brutal Appalachian winter thawed, giving way to a lush, vibrant spring that blanketed the Monongahela riverbank in a thick canopy of emerald green. I stand on the wraparound deck of my cabin, wrapping both hands around a steaming ceramic mug. The early morning mist clings to the water, slowly burning off as the sun crests the eastern ridge. The air smells of damp pine needles, rich topsoil, and fresh beginnings. It is quiet. It is a profound, uninterrupted peace that I fought for, bled for, and ultimately secured. The aftermath of my 30th birthday swept through the valley like a torrential flood, washing away decades of systemic corruption. The federal authorities did not offer leniency. The comprehensive forensic audit I submitted provided an airtight roadmap of every forged invoice, offshore shell company, and stolen municipal record. The trial was swift, brutal, and undeniably public. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse in Charleston 3 months ago, watching the final sentencing. Harlan Byers stood before the judge, stripped of his bespoke tailored suits and his towering arrogance. He wore standard-issue corrections clothing, his broad shoulders sunken, his hair rapidly thinning and turning stark white. The judge handed down a 15-year sentence for grand larceny wire fraud and the prolonged exploitation of a minor. Harlan did not turn to look at me as the bailiffs led him away. He simply stared at the floor, a hollowed-out husk of a man who realized his curated legacy amounted to a prison identification number. Wyatt attempted to save himself by immediately turning state's evidence. The golden child folded under the very first hour of interrogation, eagerly trading his father's remaining secrets for a reduced sentence. But the scale of his own embezzlement at the Blackwood Ridge development was too vast to ignore. He received 5 years in a medium security facility, followed by a lifetime ban from operating any commercial contracting entity. Natalie finalized her divorce proceedings before Wyatt even saw the inside of a courtroom, taking half of whatever legally acquired assets remained and relocating to the opposite side of the country. Wyatt is currently learning to survive in a concrete cell, wholly devoid of the imported veneer and unearned privilege he once weaponized against me. As for Loretta, the woman who snatched my keys and demanded I vacate my own property, she is serving an 8-year term for her role in the guardianship forgery and subsequent financial manipulation. The local newspapers published the detailed accounts of how she and Harlan stole a grieving family's infant to fund their societal climb. Her country club memberships were instantly revoked. Her elite friends publicly disavowed her. She spends her days in a minimum security wing, utterly isolated, haunted by the memory of a dropped brass keyring and a failed eviction. They sought to humiliate me and render me homeless. Instead, they built their own cages and locked themselves inside. The destruction of the Bayer dynasty left a sprawling vacuum in the local economy, one that I stepped in to fill. At midnight on my 30th birthday, the state courts officially transferred the holding company into my name. I did not inherit a passive bank account. I inherited the Caldwell Land Trust. The transition from a working-class forestry auditor to the head of an immense Appalachian empire was jarring. But I approached the estate with the same meticulous scrutiny I applied to every ledger. I cleaned house. I fired the corrupt regional managers who had turned a blind eye to Wyatt's illegal clear-cutting. I voided the predatory contracts Harlan forced upon local landowners. I mandated sweeping reforms across the entire portfolio, instituting strict replanting initiatives and rigorous ecological compliance standards. The energy tycoons and real estate developers who once whispered about me in my living room now sit across from me in executive boardrooms, sweating nervously as I scrutinize their operational permits. They know I cannot be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. They know I count the rings on the timber and verify every single digit on the page. The crunch of heavy tires rolling over the gravel driveway pulls me from my thoughts. I turn my head, watching a familiar, battered, canvas-colored pickup truck park near the base of the deck stairs. The driver's side door groans in protest as it opens. Silas Caldwell steps out into the crisp morning air. He wears the same heavy work jacket and scuffed leather boots he wore on the night he stormed into my kitchen. Silas does not care about projecting wealth. He cares about the health of the ridge and the integrity of the soil. He walks up the wooden steps, his heavy footfalls a comforting rhythm. He carries a thick roll of topographical maps tucked under his left arm. "Morning, Vera," he says, his voice carrying that deep, resonant rumble. "Morning, Uncle Silas," I reply. The title still feels new on my tongue, but it settles warmly in my chest. I walk over to the outdoor patio table, picking up a second ceramic mug I prepared just moments before his arrival. I hand it to him. He takes it, wrapping his calloused fingers around the warm clay. He brings the rim to his nose, inhaling the distinct aroma of steeped black leaves, dark mountain honey, and a sharp pinch of black peppercorns. A genuine, unguarded smile crinkles the weathered corners of his gray eyes. Caroline would be immensely proud of what you are doing with the Blackwood tract, Silas says, taking a slow sip of the spiced tea. Those new saplings are taking root beautifully. We will have a strong canopy restored there in a few years. It took a lot of soil remediation to fix the damage Wyatt caused, I say, leaning against the sturdy oak railing. But the foundation is solid now. The earth recovers if you give it the right support. Silas nods, looking out over the rushing waters of the Monongahela. You know, he murmurs, his tone turning reflective. I spent 30 years looking for a ghost. I thought Harlan managed to bury my sister's legacy forever. I never expected that ghost to show up on my doorstep holding a forensic audit and a demand for corporate accountability. I smile, looking down into the dark liquid in my own mug. Harlan spent his entire life underestimating the people around him. He thought teaching me to keep my head down and work hard would make me a compliant servant. He did not realize he was just training me to dig deeper than anyone else. We stand in a comfortable, companionable silence. There is no need for grand theatrical performances here. There are no expectations to project a flawless facade. We are two auditors of the forest, bound by blood mutual respect and a shared commitment to the land that raised us. I look back at my custom-built home. The timber frame cabin stands as a fortress of reclaimed wood and riverstone. It is a physical manifestation of my resilience. The people who raised me tried to use this house as a weapon to destroy my independence. They believed that because they provided the initial stolen capital, they owned my soul. They thought my worth was tied entirely to their validation and their twisted interpretation of loyalty. They were wrong. My worth was never held in Harlan's bank accounts or Loretta's approval. It was forged in the freezing mud of the logging camps, in the late nights poring over complex yield reports, and in the quiet determination to build a life rooted in truth. I survived their cruelty because I refused to internalize their lies. I documented the rot, I set the boundary, and I let the sheer weight of reality crash down upon their fragile, fabricated empire. I take a final sip of the sweet, peppery tea. The heat blooms in my chest, a constant reminder of the woman who brought me into this world, and the uncle who helped me reclaim it. I did not need the buyer name to find my purpose. I did not need their blood to discover my strength. The truth was always right here, written in the ancient roots of the Appalachian Mountains, waiting for an auditor willing to uncover it. I am Vera Caldwell. This is my land, and the roots I have planted today will outlast us all. The wind that howls through the Appalachian pines does not care about the name on a deed. It only cares about the strength of the timber. When Vera Beyer stood in the center of her custom-built oak home, surrounded by 75 silent, staring guests, she wasn't just facing an extortion plot orchestrated by the people who raised her. She was standing at the epicenter of a cultural collision. Her story, a harrowing descent into fake DNA tests, hidden land trusts, and breathtaking betrayal, is far more than a gripping mountain thriller. It is a mirror held up to the darkest, most unspoken corners of the American family structure. It forces us to strip away the glossy veneer of the traditional household and ask a terrifying question. What happens when the people entrusted to protect you view your very existence as a debt to be collected? In American culture, we place the aesthetic of the traditional family on a nearly untouchable pedestal. We are conditioned to idolize the perfectly manicured lawns, the unified holiday dinners, and the unwavering public solidarity. There is an unspoken contract in our society that equates a pristine family image with private moral superiority. Harlan and Loretta Beyer understood this cultural currency flawlessly. They weaponized the traditional family structure, using their elite status and manufactured respectability not as a moral compass, but as a heavy, impenetrable shield. They believed that if the exterior of their dynasty looked expensive and stable enough, no one, least of all their quiet, dutiful daughter, would ever dare to inspect the foundation. But raising a child demands far more than providing a roof, an education, and a rehearsed public narrative. It requires an unwavering daily commitment to honesty, fairness, and deep emotional awareness. When a family prioritizes its image over its integrity, the home stops being a sanctuary and becomes a stage. Harlan and Loretta did not raise a daughter. They cultivated an asset. They kept Vera close, feeding her just enough conditional approval to ensure her unquestioning loyalty, turning her into the family workhorse while keeping her blind to her true worth. Emotional awareness is the true beating heart of effective parenting. It is the profound ability to look at a child and see a distinct, sovereign human being rather than an extension of your own ego or a tool to elevate your social standing. When a child is raised in an environment utterly devoid of this emotional attunement, they do not learn how to be loved, they learn how to be useful. Vera was conditioned to be the family's auditor, their quiet fixer, the silent force that bailed her brother out of the mud and kept his chaos at bay. Harlan's demand for $400,000 in repayment for raising her was not just a desperate legal extortion plot. It was the ultimate grotesque manifestation of transactional parenting. It represents a terrifying mindset where children are viewed as long-term investments expected to yield a literal return on demand. Honest and fair parenting, by contrast, gives without keeping a ledger. True long-term guidance means planting a seed, nurturing the soil, and stepping back to let the tree grow without demanding the branches hand over their fruit on your strict schedule. This brings us to a truth that pushes violently against conventional wisdom. A philosophical pill that society is often too frightened to swallow. For generations, we have hammered a specific proverb into our collective psyche. Blood is thicker than water. We are taught that loyalty to our family of origin is paramount, that we must forgive the unforgivable, and that we must keep the peace at all costs simply because we share a dinner table or a last name. We are told that we owe our parents a lifelong debt simply for the act of raising us. Vera's story demands that we abandon this toxic ideology entirely. The most profound lesson we can extract from this Appalachian showdown is that unquestioning familial loyalty is not a virtue. It is a meticulously designed trap. True family is not an unearned birthright stamped on a forged certificate, nor is it guaranteed by decades of shared holidays. Family is an active, ongoing agreement built on mutual respect, emotional safety, and absolute accountability. You do not owe your sanity, your assets, or your future to people who exploit you, even if they put food on your plate when you were 10 years old. The Beyers weaponized the concept of loyalty to isolate Vera, banking on the assumption that her ingrained sense of duty would override her sense of self-preservation. They were wrong. Setting a boundary, even a boundary that results in handcuffs and public ruin for the people who raised you, is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-respect. We must stop teaching children that they are forever indebted to their parents and start teaching them that they are entitled to safety, regardless of who is threatening it. Long-term guidance for children in the modern era cannot rely on archaic authoritarianism or the expectation of blind obedience. It must be rooted in teaching them how to seek the truth, how to read the ledgers of their own lives, and how to spot the rot beneath the bark. If we want to raise resilient, independent adults, we must build them out of solid oak, not cheap imported veneer. We must equip them with the precise tools they need to walk away if they ever find themselves standing in a room full of people who want to tear them down. Vera survived her family's ambush because she was a brilliant, clear-eyed auditor. She learned to look at the cold, hard math of her reality rather than succumbing to emotional manipulation. Stories like Vera's resonate so deeply because they echo the quiet, hidden battles many of us fight behind closed doors. They remind us that the facades of high society often hide the deepest decay, and that the quietest people in the room are frequently the ones holding the most explosive truths. If this journey of reclaiming one's worth, exposing toxic family dynamics, and finding justice struck a chord with you, please take a moment to follow Amanda Told Stories. We are building a community that explores the narratives society often tries to keep quiet. Stories of survival, truth, and the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. Ultimately, Vera's triumph on the banks of the Monongahela River was not about acquiring a $12 million land trust. It was about recognizing that the soil she stood upon was always hers to claim. We spend so much of our lives trying to earn a seat at tables built by people who fundamentally do not want us there. We polish the cheap veneer, hoping it will eventually turn into solid wood if we just love it hard enough or serve them long enough. But the ultimate philosophical truth of adulthood is this: you cannot heal a sick root system by watering the leaves. At some point, you have to take an axe to the diseased trunk, even if you are the one who planted it. Take a long, hard look at the people sitting across from you tonight. Look at the structures, the expectations, and the loyalties you have built your life around. Are you standing in a sanctuary of your own making? Or are you just standing in a very well-decorated ambush? The keys to your life are sitting on the counter, glinting in the light. The only question left is, who is really holding them?